The stagecoach lurched to a stop, kicking up dust that hung in the air like a question nobody wanted to answer. Everett Hale stood outside the general store, hat pulled low, watching the door swing open with the kind of attention a man gives to something he's already regretting. He'd written the letter 3 months ago. Short, practical. No flowery language, no promises he couldn't keep. He needed help on the ranch. Someone who could cook, mend, keep the books from turning into a disaster worse than they already were. In return, a roof, meals, safety, a partnership. Nothing more. The advertisement had been specific. No frills, no expectations of romance. A working arrangement for a woman seeking security and a man seeking order. He'd received 4 replies. 3 were from women who clearly hadn't read past the word marriage. The 4th was different, brief, almost curt. It listed skills instead of qualities, experience instead of hopes. The handwriting was neat, controlled. The signature was simple. L. Voss. That was enough for him. Now, watching the stagecoach settle, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. The driver climbed down first, then reached up to help the passenger. A gloved hand appeared, practical leather, not lace, and Everett straightened slightly, preparing himself for whatever version of practical was about to step into his life. What he wasn't prepared for was her. Lillian Voss didn't wait for help. She took the driver's hand for balance, not support, and stepped down with the kind of deliberate control that made it clear she knew exactly how much space she took up and didn't apologize for a damn bit of it. She was large, not in the way people whispered about or tried to ignore. Large in a way that made ignoring her impossible. Broad-shouldered, heavy-set, solid. She wore a dark traveling dress that looked expensive once, now worn at the edges from use, not neglect. Her hair was pinned back severely, a few dark strands escaping near her temples. Her face was round, her jaw strong, her mouth set in a line that suggested she'd heard every comment, every whisper, every judgment, and had stopped caring years ago. But it was her eyes that made Everett's stomach tighten, sharp, assessing. The kind of eyes that missed nothing and forgot even less. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds, taking in his worn boots, his work-roughened hands, the way he stood just slightly off-center to favor his left leg. Then she looked past him, scanning the street, the buildings, the ridgeline in the distance, calculating. "Mr. Hale?" Her voice was low, steady. No tremor, no uncertainty. "Mrs. Voss?" "Miss," she corrected him without heat. "For now." He nodded, picked up her trunk, heavier than he expected, and gestured toward the wagon. "It's an hour to the ranch. We can talk there." "We can talk now." She didn't move. "I need to know if you're having second thoughts." The directness caught him off guard. Most women he'd known danced around discomfort, smoothed over awkwardness with polite deflection. Lillian Voss planted herself in the middle of it and waited. "Are you?" he asked. "I asked first." "Fair enough." Everett set the trunk down, met her eyes properly. "I wrote what I needed. You wrote what you could offer. If that's changed, say so now." "It hasn't." No hesitation. "Has yours?" "No." She studied him for another moment, then nodded once. "Good. Then let's not waste time pretending this is something it isn't." She walked to the wagon, climbed up without assistance, and settled herself on the bench seat with the same controlled efficiency she'd used stepping off the coach. Everett loaded her trunk, tied it down, and took his place beside her. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes. The land stretched out around them, rolling hills, sparse grass, the kind of country that looked empty until you learned to see what was actually there. Everett had lived here for 8 years, bought the ranch after the war, after he'd stopped being able to stomach cities and crowds and people who asked too many questions. He'd wanted quiet, solitude, a place where the work was hard enough to tire him out and the silence was deep enough to drown out everything else. It had worked, mostly. "How much land?" Lillian asked. 300 acres, about half usable for grazing." "Water?" "Creek runs through the north section, spring-fed, doesn't dry up." "Stock?" 40 head of cattle, dozen horses. She was quiet for a moment, watching the landscape roll past. "And you've been managing this alone?" "Had a hand until last winter. He moved on." "Why?" Everett glanced at her. Most people would have let that question slide, assumed the answer was simple economics or wanderlust. Lillian was watching him with that same sharp assessment, waiting. He didn't like the isolation, Everett said finally. Got too quiet for him. And you advertised for a wife instead of another ranch hand because a hand leaves when the work gets hard or the money gets tight. A wife stays. Lillian's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. That's remarkably cynical. That's remarkably honest. True. She adjusted her skirts, settling more comfortably on the seat. And you want someone who can keep house, manage accounts, and not expect affection or attention beyond basic civility. That's what I wrote. That's what you wrote, she agreed. What you didn't write is why a man who clearly values solitude would invite another person into it permanently. Everett kept his eyes on the road. I didn't invite you to analyze me, Miss Voss. Mrs. Hale, if we're doing this, she said it matter-of-factly, like she was correcting a ledger entry. And I'm not analyzing, I'm clarifying. You want help, not company, partnership, not intimacy, a business arrangement that happens to involve living under the same roof. Yes. Then we'll get along fine. She folded her hands in her lap. I can cook, clean, mend, and manage accounts better than most men I've met. I don't gossip, I don't complain, and I don't create drama. I'll keep your house in order and your finances from collapsing. In return, I get security, stability, and the legal protection of your name. The way she said legal protection made Everett's jaw tighten. There was a story there. He could feel it like a splinter under skin, small but persistent. He didn't ask. They reached the ranch as the sun was starting its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. The house sat low against the land, built from rough-hewn logs and necessity. 1 story, 4 rooms, a porch that sagged slightly on the north end. The barn was in better shape, newer, larger, built to last through winter storms and summer heat. Lillian climbed down, stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The porch needs leveling, she said. I know. And the roof's going to leak come spring if you don't replace those shingles on the west side. I know. She turned to look at him. But the barn's solid. You prioritized the livestock over your own comfort. It wasn't a question, but Everett answered anyway. Stock feeds us. House just keeps us dry. Practical. She picked up her smaller bag, the one she'd kept on her lap during the entire ride, and headed for the door. Show me the kitchen. I'll start dinner. The first 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Lillian moved through the house like she was cataloging every inch of it, learning the layout, the quirks, the way the door stuck in humid weather and the stove ran hot on the left side. She didn't rearrange anything without asking, didn't impose her preferences over his established patterns. But she improved things. The kitchen became organized, supplies grouped by use, tools hung within easy reach instead of scattered across surfaces. The books, which Everett had been avoiding for 2 months, were sorted, balanced, and presented to him with a list of expenses that needed addressing and income that could be better allocated. She worked efficiently, never rushing but never wasting motion either. Her size didn't slow her down, she just moved differently, deliberately. Each action calculated to conserve energy, to avoid unnecessary steps. She thought ahead, planned her routes through the house and the yard like a general mapping terrain. And she was quiet, not silent. She'd hum sometimes while working, low and tuneless. But she didn't fill the air with chatter, didn't seem to need conversation to feel comfortable. Everett appreciated that more than he'd expected to. But there were things that didn't fit, small things, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. The way she always sat with her back to the wall, facing the door. The leather bag she kept within arm's reach, even when she was cooking or mending. Even, he noticed once, when she was sleeping, it was tucked between the wall and the side of her bed in the small room he'd cleared for her. The slight hesitation whenever someone from town called her Mrs. Hale. Just a fraction of a second, like she was reminding herself to answer to it. And the way she studied the land. On the 4th morning, Everett found her standing on the ridge behind the house, looking down at the creek that cut through the northern section. She'd been there for 20 minutes, just watching. When he approached, she didn't startle. That water's moving faster than it should be for late summer, she said. Everett stopped beside her, followed her gaze. Been a wet season. She pointed to a spot about 50 yards upstream. You see where the bank's undercut? How the soil's darker there, more saturated? He did, now that she'd pointed it out. You're going to have flooding problems, Lillian continued. Maybe not this year, but soon. The creek's changing course. Slowly. In 5 years, maybe 10, it'll jump that bank and cut a new channel through your grazing land. Everett stared at her. How do you know that? I pay attention. She turned to head back down the slope. You should reinforce that section. Stones, timber supports, something to redirect the flow before it decides to go where you don't want it. She was right. He could see it now, the way the water was working at the bank, patient and relentless. It would have taken him another year to notice, maybe longer. By then, the damage would have already started. Where'd you learn to read land like that? He asked. Lillian kept walking. My father owned property, lots of it. I watched the men he hired make expensive mistakes because they didn't bother to observe before they acted. Your father? Everett caught the past tense. He's dead? No. Her voice flattened slightly. He's very much alive. She didn't offer anything else, and Everett didn't push. But the splinter dug a little deeper. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Everett was mending fence line when he saw the rider coming up the road, the mail carrier from town, making his weekly rounds. He collected the post, flipped through it. Bills, mostly. A notice about a cattle auction in the next county, and one envelope that made his stomach drop. Heavy paper, expensive, sealed with dark wax that had been pressed with some kind of insignia he couldn't make out. Addressed in careful, formal script to Miss Lillian Thorne. Care of Everett Hale. Hale Ranch, not Voss. Thorne. Everett stood in the yard holding the letter like it might bite him, debating. He could give it to her, watch her face, see what story was written there. Or he could ask first, demand honesty before handing over something that clearly mattered. He did neither. He walked into the house, found Lillian at the kitchen table, working through supply orders for winter stock. Set the letter down in front of her without a word. She went very, very still. Her hands, which had been writing steady figures in the ledger, stopped. Her eyes fixed on the envelope, on that name written across the front. For 3 full seconds, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she picked it up, broke the seal, and read. Everett watched her face. It didn't crumble. Didn't show fear or panic or any of the things he might have expected. Instead, it went carefully, deliberately blank, the kind of expression a person learned through practice. When she finished reading, she folded the letter precisely, set it aside, and went back to her supply orders like nothing had happened. Lillian, the northern fence needs attention, she said, her voice perfectly level. I noticed yesterday that 2 posts are rotting at the base. They'll snap in the first strong wind. Lillian, and we should consider increasing the hay order for winter. The cattle are in good condition now, but if we have a hard freeze, who's looking for you? Her pen stopped. She didn't look up. Someone who doesn't have the right to, she said finally. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving. Everett pulled out the chair across from her, sat down. You came here under a false name. I came here under a name. I never claimed it was the one I was born with. Legal protection, he said, remembering her words from that first day. That's what you called it. What are you protecting yourself from? Lillian set down her pen, finally met his eyes. I'm protecting myself from being dragged back to a life I didn't choose by a man who thinks he owns everything he touches, including his daughter. The word daughter landed like a stone in still water. Your father's looking for you. My father, Lillian said with careful precision, is looking for his property, his heir, his investment. He's not looking for me. He never has been. And I'd rather burn this entire ranch to the ground than go back to being what he needs me to be. There was no heat in her voice, no anger, just cold, absolute certainty. Everett leaned back in his chair, studied her. What does he need you to be? Marriageable. The word came out flat, bitter. Or at least married. To the right kind of man. Someone with connections, influence, money. Someone who can expand his empire and secure his legacy. She picked up the letter, held it like evidence. He'd already chosen the candidate, had already negotiated terms. I was informed, not consulted. So you ran. So I ran. Lillian smoothed the letter against the table. 3 months ago. Took what I could carry and disappeared. Changed my name, changed my direction, made myself impossible to find. Her mouth twisted. Apparently I wasn't impossible enough. Everett looked at the envelope, at the expensive paper and formal seal. How'd he find you? I don't know, but he did. And now he's sending... She paused, scanned the letter again. An associate, someone named Garrett. He'll be here within the week to discuss my return. And if you refuse? Lillian met his eyes. My father doesn't accept refusal. He negotiates, he pressures, he outmaneuvers. If talking doesn't work, he'll try money. If money doesn't work, he'll try leverage, threats, legal action, whatever tool is most effective. She folded the letter again, precise creases. He's very good at getting what he wants. Then why warn you? Why not just show up? Because he's arrogant enough to think a warning will make me compliant, that knowing he's found me will be enough to break my resistance. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. He still thinks I'm the girl who used to cry when he raised his voice. He doesn't understand that I stopped being that girl the moment I walked out his door. Everett sat quiet for a moment, processing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shingle on the west side of the roof. The one Lillian had pointed out needed replacing. What do you want to do? He asked finally. Lillian looked at him, something shifting in her expression. Surprise, maybe. Like she'd expected judgment or anger, not a question about her preference. I want to stay, she said. I want to build something here that's mine, actually mine, not managed for me or controlled by someone else's expectations. She straightened in her chair. But I won't let my problems become yours. If you want me gone before this man arrives, I understand. I'll pack tonight. Everett considered that. Considered the easy path, let her leave, avoid the confrontation, keep his life simple and uncomplicated. Then he considered Lillian standing on the ridge, reading the land like a map. Lillian organizing his disaster of a kitchen, balancing his books, fixing problems he hadn't noticed yet. Lillian moving through his house with quiet competence, never asking for more than what they'd agreed on, never making herself smaller to fit his expectations. We had an agreement, he said. Partnership, security, legal protection. He met her eyes. I don't go back on agreements. This isn't what you signed up for. I signed up for complications I didn't specify. You're just a different kind than I expected. He stood up, pushed his chair back in. When this Garrett arrives, we tell him you're married, legally. That changes things, doesn't it? Makes it harder for your father to claim ownership? It makes it harder, Lillian agreed slowly. But we're not actually married. We can be. Justice of the peace in town can do it in an hour. We write it up, make it legal, present him with documentation he can't argue with. Lillian stared at him. You'd marry me, actually marry me, to keep a stranger from dragging me back to my father? I'd marry you to honor the agreement we made. Everett said it simply, like it was obvious. You came here for legal protection. This is what that looks like. For the first time since he'd met her, Lillian looked genuinely uncertain. Not afraid, uncertain, like she'd calculated every possible response except this one. It would be real, she said finally. Legally binding, you understand that? I understand. And you do this for, what, principle? Everett thought about that. About the ranch and the silence and the 8 years he'd spent building walls between himself and everyone else. About the locked room at the end of the hall that he hadn't opened in 3 years. About the weight of isolation that had felt like safety until it started feeling like a cage. For partnership, he said, like we agreed. Lillian was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to the window, looked out at the land she'd already started learning, started protecting. Okay, she said. Okay, we'll do it. But Everett, she turned to face him. If this goes wrong, if my father finds a way around this or makes your life difficult because of me, I need you to know. I'll leave. I won't let you pay for my choices. Noted. Everett headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're anyone's property, and I don't think running from someone who treats you like one makes you weak. He left before she could respond, but he saw her face shift, something unguarded flickering across it before she locked it down again. They rode into town the next morning and married before noon. The justice of the peace, a weathered man named Morrison who'd seen stranger things, asked the required questions, and recorded the required information without comment. When he pronounced them married, Lillian didn't flinch, and Everett didn't hesitate. They were legal now. The question was whether that would be enough. Obese. Garrett arrived 6 days later. Everett was working on the northern fence when he heard the horse. He straightened, saw the rider coming up the road. A man in his 40s, well-dressed in a way that said money, but not ostentation. Dark coat, expensive but practical. Good horse, well-maintained gear. He rode like someone comfortable with power, with being listened to. Everett set down his tools, walked back toward the house. Lillian was on the porch. She'd positioned herself in the chair by the door, back straight, hands folded, face composed. But Everett could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed together just slightly too hard. The rider stopped in the yard, dismounted smoothly, smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for the Hale Ranch." "You found it." Everett stopped at the porch steps, didn't offer his hand. "Excellent." The man's smile widened fractionally. "My name is Garrett. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Thorne regarding a family matter." "No family matters here." Everett kept his voice flat, uninterested. "Just ranch business." Garrett's eyes flicked past him to Lillian, sharpened with recognition. "Miss Thorne, it's a relief to see you safe. Your father has been quite concerned." "You're mistaken," Lillian said, her voice steady as stone. "My name is Mrs. Hale." Garrett's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind it. "I think we both know that's a recent development, and one that can be addressed." "Can it?" Everett stepped forward just enough to make Garrett's attention snap back to him. "Because where I come from, a legal marriage is pretty hard to address without consent from both parties." "Legal?" Garrett tasted the word. "Yes, I'm sure the paperwork is in order. Mr. Thorne is quite thorough about verifying such things." He paused, let that sink in. "But there are other considerations. Questions of competency, of undue influence, of marriages entered into under false pretenses." It was a threat, elegantly phrased, but a threat nonetheless. Everett felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd had standing on battlefields, watching men in clean uniforms make decisions about other people's lives from a safe distance. "You questioning my wife's competency?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm questioning the circumstances." Garrett's smile never wavered. A woman fleeing her family, using a false name, marrying a stranger in a matter of weeks, these things raise concerns. Legitimate concerns that a court might find persuasive. Lillian stood, moved to stand beside Everett. Not behind him, beside him. "You can tell my father," she said, each word deliberate, "that I'm exactly where I choose to be, married to whom I choose, living the life I choose. And if he wants to waste his money dragging this through courts, he's welcome to try. But I'm not coming back." Garrett studied her for a long moment. "He thought you might say that. He asked me to remind you of your mother, of what she'd want, of the promises you made her." Lillian's composure cracked, just for an instant, pain flashing across her face before she locked it down. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice shaking with something that wasn't fear. "Don't you dare use her against me. I'm simply delivering a message." "Then consider it delivered," Everett cut in. "Now get off my land." Garrett didn't move. "Mr. Thorne is not a man who accepts defeat easily. He'll find other ways." "I said get off my land." Everett's voice dropped, took on the edge he hadn't used in years. "Or I'll remove you myself." For the first time, Garrett's smile faltered. He looked at Everett, really looked, and whatever he saw there made him reassess. He glanced at Lillian once more, at the way she stood firm beside her husband, unmovable. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes," Lillian replied. "It is." Garrett mounted his horse, turned it toward the road. But before he left, he looked back. "He'll come himself next time. You should prepare for that." Then he was gone, dust rising in his wake. Everett stood still until the rider disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to Lillian, saw her trembling, not with fear, with rage. "He used her," she said, her voice raw. "He used my mother against me. Seemed to think it would work. It won't." Lillian's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her sides, forced them still. He doesn't understand that she's exactly why I left. She spent her whole life being what he needed, becoming smaller and quieter until there was nothing left. I watched her disappear, and I swore I wouldn't do the same. Everett didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to respond to that kind of pain. So he did the only thing he could think of. He stepped inside, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and brought one back out to her. Lillian took it, drank it in one swallow. "Thank you," she said, for not letting him. "You don't have to thank me for keeping my word." She looked at him then, really looked, and Everett saw something shift in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "No," she said quietly. "I suppose I don't." They stood there on the porch as the sun started to set, painting the ridge in shades of amber and shadow. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like partnership. The night after Garrett left, Everett didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, watching the road, listening to the wind move through the grass. It wasn't fear exactly. He'd faced worse than one well-dressed messenger with veiled threats. But something had shifted, and he couldn't quite name it. Inside, a lamp burned in Lillian's room until past midnight. He could see the light under her door, hear the occasional creak of floorboards as she paced. She didn't come out, didn't ask for company or reassurance. Whatever she was working through, she was doing it alone. He understood that. Respected it, even. When dawn finally broke, gray and cold, Everett found her in the kitchen already dressed, coffee brewing, her face carefully neutral except for the shadows under her eyes. "You look like hell," he said. "Good morning to you too." She poured 2 cups, slid one across the table to him. "We need to talk about what happens next." "Figured we might." Lillian sat down, wrapped both hands around her cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. "My father won't send another messenger. Garrett was the polite option, the attempt to handle this quietly, preserve appearances. Now that I've refused, he'll come himself." "When?" "Soon. A week, maybe 2. He'll want to see the situation firsthand, assess whether this marriage is legitimate or just a convenient fiction." She met his eyes. "And he'll bring leverage, something he thinks will force me back." "Like what?" "I don't know. That's what worries me." Lillian took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the bitterness. "My father is very good at finding pressure points. He'll have investigated you by now. Your history, your finances, anything he can use. If he can't break me directly, he'll try to break you instead." Everett leaned back in his chair, considered that. "I don't break easy. Neither do I. But he's had 40 years of practice wearing people down." She set her cup aside, folded her hands on the table. "I need you to understand what you've gotten yourself into. My father, James Thorne, owns half the rail lines west of the Mississippi. He has connections in every state capital, judges on his payroll, politicians in his pocket. When he wants something, he usually gets it. Not because he's cruel, but because he's relentless, patient, strategic. And he wants you back because losing control of me means losing face. And because the marriage he'd arranged, the one I walked away from, would have given him access to European shipping contracts worth more money than you or I could spend in 10 lifetimes." Lillian's voice was flat, reciting facts. The man he'd chosen, Marcus Whitmore, comes from old money, British, respectable. His family needs American capital. My father needs European legitimacy. I was the transaction that sealed the deal. Everett felt his jaw tighten. "You're not a transaction. Try telling him that." She stood, moved to the window, looked out at the ranch. "I grew up watching my father negotiate. Everything is leverage. Every relationship is strategy. My mother tried to teach me to be softer, gentler, more palatable. But my father saw potential in me. I was smart, observant, good with numbers. So he educated me, trained me in business, let me sit in on meetings. I thought he was preparing me to inherit, to actually be his partner. But he wasn't. No. He was making me more valuable as a bargaining chip, a wife who could manage accounts, understand contracts, navigate society. That's worth more than a simple ornament." Lillian's reflection in the window glass was hard, distant. "When he told me about Whitmore, I actually argued that I could be more useful staying single, helping run the business. He laughed, said marriage was exactly how I'd help run the business, just from inside Whitmore's household instead of his. The bitterness in her voice was like acid. "So you left," Everett said. "So I left. Took the money I'd saved from managing his accounts, money he didn't know I'd been setting aside, and disappeared. Changed my name, bought Passage West, found your advertisement." She turned from the window. "I thought I'd covered my tracks well enough. I was wrong. You covered them well enough to buy 3 months of freedom. That's something. Is it? Or did I just delay the inevitable?" Lillian's composure was cracking at the edges, frustration bleeding through. "He found me once. He'll find me again if I run, and eventually he'll find a way to force compliance, whether I want it or not." Everett stood, walked over to her. "Then we don't run. We hold this ground." "You say that like it's simple." "Didn't say it was simple. Said we hold it." He met her eyes. "You married me for legal protection. Well, you've got it. Legally, you're mine now. I'm not yours or anyone else's. Let me finish." His voice was firm but not harsh. "Legally, you're my wife. That means he can't just take you, can't arrange another marriage, can't make decisions on your behalf. He wants you back. He has to convince you to leave willingly or prove the marriage is invalid. And we both know it's not." Lillian studied him for a long moment. "You really think you can stand against a man like my father?" "I stood against worse during the war, survived. Still here." The war. Something shifted in her expression. "You don't talk about it." "No." "Why not?" Everett looked past her, out at the ridge. "Because talking doesn't change what happened. Doesn't bring back the men who didn't make it. Just opens doors I spent 8 years learning to keep closed." He could feel her watching him, assessing. Then she nodded once, accepting the boundary without pushing against it. "All right," she said, "we hold the ground. But Everett, when my father comes, he won't fight fair. He'll dig into your past, use whatever he finds against you. If there's anything you need to tell me, anything that could be used as leverage, there's nothing. Everyone has something, then he'll have to find it himself." Everett moved toward the door. "I've got fence to finish. You want me close to the house until this is settled? Say so. Otherwise, I'll work normal." Lillian was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "Work normal. I won't let him turn this place into a prison before he even arrives." But as Everett headed out, he caught her glancing at the road, at the horizon, like she was already calculating distances and escape routes. Old habits, he supposed. They didn't die easy. The next week passed in a strange kind of suspended tension. Everett worked the ranch, mended fence, checked cattle, hauled water. Normal routines, normal rhythms. But underneath it all was the waiting, heavy and persistent, like a storm building on the horizon. Lillian threw herself into work. She reorganized the entire house, scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, rearranged the pantry twice. Nervous energy, Everett recognized. She was a woman used to solving problems through action, and right now there was nothing to act on except anticipation. On the 4th day, he found her in the barn, staring at the horses. "You ride?" he asked. "Not well. My father thought it unladylike to ride astride, and side saddle is useless for anything except looking decorative." Everett grabbed a bridle, headed for the gentlest mare in the string. "Come on." "What?" "You want to stay here. You need to know the land. Can't know the land if you can't cover ground." He saddled the mare efficiently, led her out into the yard. "This is Willow. She's got sense, and she doesn't spook easy. You're going to ride her astride, and I'm going to teach you how to do it properly." Lillian looked at the horse, then at him. "Now? You got something better to do than wait for your father to show up?" She almost smiled. No, I suppose I don't." He taught her the basics: how to mount, how to sit balanced, how to hold the reins without strangling the horse or letting it wander where it pleased. She was stiff at first, self-conscious about the way she had to hike her skirts up to sit astride, about how exposed she felt without the security of side saddle's structure. But she learned fast. By the end of the first hour, she was walking Willow in steady circles around the yard. By the end of the second, she was trotting, her body starting to find the rhythm instead of fighting it. "Good," Everett said, riding alongside her on his own mount. "Now, let's see the north section." They rode out together, Everett showing her the boundaries of the ranch, pointing out landmarks. The old lightning-struck pine that marked the property line, the rocky outcrop where winter runoff collected, the meadow where the cattle preferred to graze in summer. Lillian absorbed it all, asking questions that showed she was thinking ahead, planning. "That section there," she said, pointing to a stretch of sparse grass, "that's too depleted for grazing, isn't it?" "Yeah, needs to rest." "So you rotate the herds, how often?" "Every few weeks, depending on the season." She nodded, filing it away. "And water access? You said the creek doesn't run dry, but what about during drought?" "Spring-fed means it stays steady. Might run lower, but it doesn't disappear." "Unless the spring itself fails." Everett glanced at her. "That's not likely, but possible." Lillian was watching the creek, the way it carved through the land. Everything's possible if you plan for long enough timelines. You should have a backup water source, a well, maybe. Something independent of the creek. That costs money I don't have right now. But it's worth budgeting for, worth planning toward. She met his eyes. If we're staying here, if we're building something that lasts, we need to think past next season. The word we hung in the air between them. Everett hadn't expected it, hadn't expected her to think in terms of permanence, not when her father was closing in and her entire situation felt temporary. But there it was, we. Not him and his ranch, but something shared. "All right," he said, "we'll budget for a well." They rode back as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and ash. Lillian dismounted with more confidence than she'd had mounting, led Willow into the barn without prompting. She was learning the patterns, settling into the rhythms of this place. Everett watched her brush down the mare, efficient and thorough, and felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. He'd spent 8 years keeping people at a distance, 8 years building walls between himself and anything that looked like attachment, like caring. It was safer that way, simpler. No risk of loss if you never held on to anything worth losing. But Lillian was making it harder to maintain those walls. Not because she demanded anything, she didn't, but because she fit here in ways he hadn't anticipated. Because partnership, it turned out, was a more intimate thing than he'd bargained for. That night, after dinner, she brought out the ledger. "I've been thinking about your finances," she said, spreading papers across the table. Everett suppressed a groan. "Of course you have. You're not broke, but you're closer than you should be. The ranch is profitable, but barely. You're undercharging for your cattle, overpaying for supplies, and you haven't negotiated better rates with the feed supplier in 3 years." "I'm not a negotiator." "No, but I am." She pointed to a column of figures. "If we renegotiate your supply contracts, rotate your grazing more efficiently, and sell cattle at auction instead of direct to the local buyer, you could increase your profit margin by 30%, maybe more." "We?" There was that word again. Lillian looked up, met his eyes. "Yes, we. Unless you'd prefer I keep my opinions to myself and just cook your meals quietly in the corner." "Didn't say that." "Then stop flinching every time I say we." Her voice was sharp, but not angry. "I'm here, Everett, legally married to you, living on this ranch, working to improve it. What exactly did you think partnership meant?" He didn't have a good answer for that. Partnership in his mind had been transactional. She cooks, he provides shelter. She keeps house, he keeps her safe. Clean boundaries, clear exchanges. But Lillian wasn't staying inside those boundaries. She was thinking ahead, planning improvements, investing in a future that involved both of them. And that required him to do the same. 30%, he said finally. "You really think you can manage that?" "I know I can. I spent 10 years watching my father's business managers work. I learned what they did right and what they did wrong." She pulled out another sheet, covered in her neat handwriting. "Here's what I propose. I handle all negotiations with suppliers and buyers. You focus on the land and livestock, the parts you actually understand and care about. We meet weekly to review finances, adjust strategy, plan for contingencies. Equal partnership, equal say." Everett looked at the papers, at the careful calculations and projections. She'd put hours into this, days maybe. While he'd been out mending fence, she'd been building a plan for their survival. "Equal partnership," he said slowly. "Meaning I don't make major decisions without consulting you. Meaning we don't make major decisions without consulting each other. And if we disagree, then we argue until one of us convinces the other, or we find a compromise. Lillian's mouth quirked slightly. I'm told I can be very persuasive. I'm told I can be very stubborn. Then we're well matched. She gathered the papers, stacked them neatly. Think about it. If you don't like the idea, we'll go back to the way things were. But I think this could work. I think we could build something here that's actually worth protecting. She left him alone with that thought, disappeared into her room with her ledgers and calculations. Everett sat at the table for a long time, staring at the numbers she'd written, the future she'd mapped out. Partnership. Real partnership, not just the convenient arrangement he'd imagined. It scared him more than he wanted to admit, but it also felt like something he'd been missing without knowing it. The rain started 2 days later. Not hard, just steady and cold, the kind that soaked into everything and made outdoor work miserable. Everett spent the morning in the barn, repairing tack and checking supplies, while Lillian worked on correspondence in the house. When he came in for lunch, he found her at the table, staring at a fresh letter with an expression that made his stomach drop. What is it? He's coming. 3 days from now. She held up the letter. This is from his attorney. Formal notice that James Thorne will be arriving to address matters of family concern and legal clarification. It's very polite, very official, and very much a threat. Everett took the letter, scanned it. The language was exactly what she'd said. Polite and threatening in equal measure, wrapped in legal terminology that basically said, I'm coming whether you want me to or not, and I'm bringing lawyers. All right, he said. 3 days. What do we need to prepare? Lillian looked at him like she'd expected panic or retreat, not practical planning. You're really going to stand there when he arrives? Where else would I be? It's my land. Everett, you don't understand. When my father comes, he'll bring people, lawyers, witnesses, maybe even a local judge he's already bought off. He'll make it look legitimate, make it seem like he's just a concerned father trying to protect his unstable daughter from a predatory opportunist. And you'll tell him that's not true. And he'll suggest I'm not in my right mind to make that judgment. Lillian's voice was bitter. Do you know how easy it is to have a woman declared incompetent? Especially if her father is rich enough and her choices seem erratic enough? He'll claim I fled under mental duress, that this marriage was entered into while I was unwell, that you took advantage of my vulnerable state. Everett felt anger kindle in his chest, cold and controlled. He can claim whatever he wants, doesn't make it true. The truth doesn't matter if he controls the narrative. And he's very good at controlling narratives. She stood, paced to the window. I've been thinking about this. Maybe it would be easier if I just left. Disappeared again. He can't force you to reveal where I've gone if you genuinely don't know. No. Everett, I said no. He moved to stand in front of her, made her look at him. We agreed to hold this ground. That means both of us. Not just me standing here alone while you run. I'm trying to protect you, and I'm trying to protect you. That's what marriage means, isn't it? Even the practical kind. His voice softened slightly. You asked me 3 days ago to stop flinching at we. Well, same goes for you. We're in this together. That means we face your father together. Lillian's eyes were bright. Frustration or fear or something else. Everett couldn't tell. You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me. What exactly am I asking for? She took a shaky breath. You're asking to stand between me and the most ruthless man I've ever known. You're asking to put yourself in the path of someone who will dig up every mistake you've ever made, every weakness you've ever shown, and use it to destroy your credibility and your peace. You're asking to fight a battle you can't possibly win just because you made a promise to a woman you barely know. Sounds about right. Everett held her gaze. And you're worth fighting for, not because you're helpless, because you're not, but because you shouldn't have to fight alone. The words landed harder than he'd intended. Lillian looked at him like she was seeing something she hadn't expected, like she was recalculating everything she'd assumed about him. You're either very brave or very foolish, she said quietly. Probably both. He stepped back, giving her space. Now tell me what we need to do to prepare. They spent the next 2 days getting ready. Lillian wrote letters to the justice of the peace who'd married them, requesting formal documentation of the marriage, to the bank in town, having Everett added to her account as her legal husband, to 2 respectable women in town who'd witnessed her arrival and could testify to her mental competency if needed. Everett, meanwhile, worked on the physical preparation. He repaired the sagging porch, fixed the loose shingles on the roof, made the house look maintained and stable, the home of a man who took care of what was his. He cleaned the barn, organized the tack room, made sure everything looked professional and deliberate. "You're making it look like you care what he thinks," Lillian observed, watching him work. "I'm making it look like I run a proper ranch," Everett corrected. "He's going to look for reasons to claim I'm not fit to take care of you. I'm not giving him any." On the evening before James Thorne was due to arrive, they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset. The rain had cleared, leaving the air sharp and clean. The ridge was purple in the failing light, solid and unchanging. "Are you scared?" Everett asked. Lillian considered that. Terrified. But not of him. She paused, searching for words. "Of disappointing myself, of being weak enough to let him win." "You're not weak." "I ran away in the middle of the night rather than face him directly." "That's not weakness, that's survival." Everett leaned back against the porch rail. "Knowing when to retreat so you can fight on better ground, that's strategy." "Is that what the war taught you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "War taught me a lot of things. Most of them useless. But yeah, that was one of the useful ones. Sometimes holding position gets you killed. Sometimes you have to fall back, regroup, choose your battlefield." "And this is my battlefield?" "This is our battlefield." He met her eyes. "And we're standing on ground worth defending." Lillian's expression softened, something almost tender flickering across it before she looked away. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. "I know that's not part of our agreement, but I am. Glad." Everett didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They sat in silence as the stars came out, bright and cold and indifferent to human drama. Tomorrow, James Thorne would arrive. Tomorrow, they'd find out if partnership was enough. James Thorne arrived exactly when his letter said he would. 10 o'clock in the morning, riding in a hired carriage with two men Everett recognized as the type who carried authority like weapons. One was clearly a lawyer, the other harder to place, maybe a doctor, maybe a hired witness. Both wore expensive clothes and careful expressions. Thorne himself was in his 60s, tall and lean, with silver hair and the kind of face that probably looked distinguished in photographs. He moved like a man used to commanding rooms, to having people step aside when he entered. His eyes, when they found Lillian standing on the porch, were cold and calculating. "Lillian," he said. "Not daughter, not sweetheart, just her name, like a label on a file." "Father." Her voice was steady, but Everett could see her hands pressed flat against her skirts, holding herself still through force of will. Thorne's gaze shifted to Everett. "And you must be the rancher who married my daughter." "Everett Hale." He didn't offer his hand. "Your daughter's husband." "Yes, that's what we're here to discuss." Thorne gestured to his companions. "This is Mr. Patterson, my attorney, and Dr. Vance, who's graciously agreed to consult on this matter. A doctor, of course, ready to declare Lillian mentally unfit if needed." "There's nothing to discuss," Lillian said. "I'm married, I'm settled, and I'm not returning to Boston." "Lillian, dear, you're clearly not thinking rationally." "Don't!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't call me dear, and don't tell me I'm not thinking rationally. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." Thorne's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. "You fled your home in the middle of the night, used a false name, and married a complete stranger within weeks. Those are not the actions of a woman in her right mind. Those are the actions of a woman escaping a future she didn't choose and a father who treated her like property." "I treated you like my heir, but, You treated me like leverage for a business deal." Lillian stepped forward, and Everett saw her father actually flinch back slightly, like he wasn't used to her standing her ground. "I am not currency, Father. I'm not a contract to be negotiated or an asset to be traded. I'm a person, and I'm making my own choices now." "Choices that will ruin you," Thorne said, his voice hardening. "Do you understand what you've thrown away? The Whitmore family, the connections, the future I built for you. The future you built for yourself. I was just the tool you planned to use." Thorne's jaw tightened. He turned to Everett. "How much?" "Excuse me? How much did she pay you to marry her, or how much will it take for you to walk away quietly?" Everett felt something dangerous coil in his chest. "I'm not interested in your money." "Everyone's interested in money, Mr. Hale. It's just a question of the right amount." Thorne pulled out a checkbook. Actually pulled it out right there on the porch. $10,000. That's more than your ranch will make in 5 years. Take it, sign the annulment papers, and this all ends quietly. Put that away. 20,000 then. Enough to buy a larger spread, hire hands, actually make something of this place. I said put it away. Everett's voice dropped to the tone that had made soldiers listen during the war. I'm not selling my wife. I'm not signing anything. And I'm not interested in whatever amount you think I can be bought for. Thorne studied him for a long moment. Then he put the checkbook away, his expression shifting to something colder. I see. Then we'll do this the difficult way. He nodded to Patterson, who pulled out papers of his own. We have evidence, the lawyer said, his voice professionally neutral, that this marriage was entered into fraudulently. Miss Thorne used a false name on the marriage certificate. Mrs. Hale, Lillian interrupted, and the name I used was legally mine. I filed for a name change in Denver before coming here. Patterson blinked. We have no record of such a filing. That's because you looked in Boston, not Denver. I can provide documentation. Lillian's voice was ice. I filed properly, legally changed my name from Lillian Thorne to Lillian Voss, then married under my legal name. The marriage is entirely valid. Everett felt a spike of surprise. She'd planned that far ahead, not just running, but making sure every legal detail was covered. She'd been preparing for this confrontation for months. Thorne's expression darkened. You think legal technicalities will protect you? I think the law will protect me. Isn't that what you always taught me, Father? That the law is just another tool to be used strategically? Don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything. I'm using exactly what you taught me. Lillian moved to stand beside Everett, shoulder to shoulder. I'm legally an adult, legally married, legally in control of my own decisions. You have no standing to force me back, no legal grounds to declare me incompetent, and no way to dissolve my marriage without my consent. Dr. Vance cleared his throat. Miss Thorne, I'd like to ask you some questions, if I may. Just to assess. No. Lillian cut him off. I won't be subjected to an evaluation designed to declare me mentally unfit. If you want to question my competency, you'll need to petition a court and have an impartial doctor appointed. And good luck finding a judge who'll take that case when I have witnesses who'll testify to my clear state of mind. Thorne was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he looked at Everett. Do you know who she is? What family she comes from? I know she's my wife. That's all that matters. She's the heir to a fortune, property, investments, business holdings across 3 states. When I die, all of that becomes hers. So that makes her extremely valuable. To many people. Thorne's voice was soft, dangerous, including perhaps to a struggling rancher who married her very conveniently, very quickly. The accusation was clear. Gold digger, opportunist, predator. Everett felt Lillian tense beside him, ready to defend him. He spoke first. I didn't know about your money when I advertised for a wife. Didn't know about it when she answered. Didn't know about it when I married her. And now that I do know, he met Thorne's eyes steadily. I still don't care. She can leave every penny to charity for all it matters to me. I married her because she needed protection and I needed help. That's the agreement. That's what stands. How noble. Thorne's voice dripped with sarcasm. And I'm sure that nobility will last right up until she signs her inheritance over to you. If she wants to do that, that's her choice, not mine to make. Everett crossed his arms. Seems to me you're the one who can't stop thinking about her value in dollars. I'm more interested in her value as a partner. Something flickered in Thorne's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recalculation. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. You really think this is better? He asked, his voice softer now. This ranch? This life? You could have everything, Lillian. Comfort, society, influence. Instead, you're choosing this? I'm choosing freedom, Lillian said. I'm choosing to be a person instead of a pawn. Yes, Father. This is better. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. You're making a mistake. When you realize that, when this fantasy collapses and you need help, I won't come to you. The words landed like stones. Thorne's face hardened. Very well. But understand this. I will contest the marriage. I will tie up any inheritance in legal proceedings for years. I will make it as difficult as possible for you to access what's rightfully yours. Do what you need to do, Lillian said. I'm not coming back. Thorne looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned to his lawyer, his doctor, and gestured toward the carriage. We're done here. They left without another word, dust rising behind the carriage as it rolled back toward town. Everett and Lillian stood on the porch, watching until the carriage disappeared over the ridge. Then Lillian's knees buckled. Everett caught her, held her steady as she shook, not crying, not collapsing, just trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline and confrontation. I did it, she whispered. I actually stood up to him. You did. He's going to make this hard. The inheritance, the legal battles, let him. We don't need his money. Lillian pulled back, looked at him. You mean that? Yeah, I do. She laughed, shaky and breathless but genuine. You're either the best man I've ever met or the craziest. Told you, probably both. They went inside and Lillian immediately pulled out her ledgers, like she needed the familiar comfort of numbers and planning. Everett made coffee, set a cup beside her, and sat down across the table. What happens now? He asked. Now we wait. He'll file legal challenges, try to freeze my inheritance, maybe even try to have the marriage annulled through the courts. It'll take months, maybe years. She looked up from her papers. And through all of it, we have to prove this marriage is real. That means presenting ourselves as an actual couple, not just a business arrangement. What does that mean exactly? It means we need to be seen together in town, attend social events as husband and wife, make it clear we're building a life together. Lillian paused. And it means if anyone asks questions about our relationship, our answers need to match. Everett understood what she wasn't saying. They needed to look like they cared about each other. Like this was more than just paperwork. The problem was, he was starting to realize it already was. The week after her father left, Lillian barely slept. Everett would wake in the middle of the night to lamplight under her door, to the sound of her pacing, papers rustling. She was preparing for the legal battle she knew was coming, documenting everything, building her defense like a general fortifying position. He left her to it mostly, gave her space to work through whatever she needed to work through. But on the fourth night, when he came in from checking the horses at 2 a.m. and found her still awake, still writing, he'd had enough. You're going to make yourself sick, he said from her doorway. She didn't look up. I'm fine. You're not sleeping. You're barely eating. That's not fine. I need to be ready. When his lawyers file, they'll file whether you sleep or not. Everett moved into the room, took the pen from her hand. And you'll handle it better if you're not half dead from exhaustion. Lillian finally looked at him, and he saw the fear beneath her determination. I can't stop, Everett. If I stop, if I let myself relax, I'll start thinking about what happens if we lose. If he finds a way to break the marriage, to drag me back, we won't lose. You can't know that. No, but I know you're tougher than you think you are, and I know running yourself into the ground won't help. He set the pen down on her desk, out of reach. Come on. You're going to eat something, and then you're going to sleep. I'm not hungry. Don't care. You're eating anyway. She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have told her it wouldn't work. She followed him to the kitchen, sat at the table while he made eggs and bread, actual food instead of the coffee and nerves she'd been surviving on. They ate in silence for a while. Then Lillian spoke, her voice quiet. My mother used to do this. Stay up all night working on things she couldn't control, trying to plan for every possibility. My father hated it, said it made her weak, emotional. She pushed eggs around her plate. I swore I wouldn't be like her. Wouldn't let fear control me that way. This isn't the same thing. Isn't it? Everett considered that. Your mother was trying to control things that couldn't be controlled. You're preparing for a real fight. That's different. Is it? Or am I just afraid of being powerless again? Lillian set down her fork. When I lived with my father, everything was decided for me. Where I went, who I saw, what I studied, who I'd marry. I had no say in my own life. And now, even after running, even after marrying you, he's still finding ways to take my choices away. Still making me react instead of act. Then stop reacting. Start acting. She looked at him. What do you mean? You said we need to present ourselves as a real couple, so let's do that. Not because we're forced to, but because we choose to. Everett leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow, we go into town. We get supplies, we talk to people, we show up together. Not hiding, not defensive, just living. You hate going into town. Yeah, but I hate watching you tear yourself apart more. He met her eyes. Your father's strategy is to make you afraid, to keep you off balance. So we do the opposite. We act like we've already won. Lillian was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she nodded slowly. All right, tomorrow. We'll go into town. And tonight, you sleep. Tonight I sleep, she agreed. She did, finally. Everett heard her settle, heard the lamp go out, heard silence that lasted until morning. When she emerged the next day, she still looked tired, but the edge of panic was gone. She'd found her center again. They hitched the wagon and headed into town just after dawn. The ride was quiet, companionable. Lillian sat beside him on the bench seat, watching the landscape roll past with the same careful attention she gave everything. You really do hate this, she observed. Going into town, I mean. People ask questions, make assumptions, want to know things that aren't their business. And you prefer isolation. I prefer quiet. Everett glanced at her. Present company excluded. She almost smiled. I'm not quiet. No, but you're not loud in the ways that bother me. He guided the wagon around a rut in the road. You don't pry, don't push. When you want to know something, you just ask directly instead of fishing for it with small talk. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. Sounds like a compliment. Lillian adjusted her skirts, settling more comfortably. For what it's worth, you're not what I expected either. What did you expect? Honestly? Someone desperate. Someone who needed a wife badly enough to advertise for one sight unseen. I thought you'd be difficult, demanding, maybe cruel in small ways, the kind men are when they feel entitled to a woman's service. She looked at him. But you're not any of those things. You're just solitary. Like you built walls to keep everyone out and forgot how to take them down. Everett's jaw tightened. Those walls serve a purpose. I know. I built my own. Lillian's voice was soft. But maybe we can both afford to lower them a little. Just with each other. He didn't answer that, didn't know how to. But something in his chest shifted, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Town was already bustling when they arrived. Saturday morning meant people coming in from surrounding ranches, farmers selling produce, the general store crowded with customers. Everett pulled the wagon up in front of the mercantile, helped Lillian down. The moment they stepped onto the street, the stares started. Everett was used to some attention. People knew him, knew he kept to himself, knew he didn't socialize much. But this was different. This was the kind of scrutiny that came with scandal, with gossip. Word had spread, apparently, about his sudden marriage, about Lillian. He could see it in the way women's eyes tracked them, in the way conversations stopped when they passed. Not hostile, exactly, just curious, invasive. Lillian felt it too. She stiffened slightly, her chin coming up in that defensive way she had. But she didn't shrink back, didn't apologize for existing. She walked beside him with the same steady confidence she'd had stepping off the stagecoach that first day. Inside the store, Martha Cunningham, the owner's wife, looked up from the counter, and her eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hair. Everett Hale, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of a woman who lived for gossip. I heard you'd gone and gotten married, but I didn't believe it until now. Martha. Everett kept his voice neutral. This is my wife, Lillian. Mrs. Hale, Lillian added, extending her hand. It's a pleasure. Martha took her hand, but her eyes were already cataloging everything. Lillian's size, her clothes, the way she stood, judging, assessing, forming opinions. Well, Martha said finally, this is certainly unexpected. How did you two meet? Through correspondence, Lillian said smoothly. I was looking for a new start, and Everett's advertisement seemed like a good fit. An advertisement, Martha's voice dripped with barely concealed disapproval. How practical. Very practical, Lillian agreed, her tone pleasant but firm. We're both practical people. It's working out well. The lie came easily, and Everett realized that's what they were doing now, building a story, creating a version of their marriage that would satisfy public scrutiny. Not the truth, but close enough to it that they could maintain it consistently. They spent the next hour gathering supplies, and every interaction followed the same pattern. People stared, people asked questions disguised as polite conversation, people made assumptions. And Lillian handled all of it with a grace that surprised him. She didn't explain too much, didn't justify their choices, just presented them as facts and moved on. It was only when they were loading the wagon that things shifted. A woman approached, younger, maybe 30, with a kind face and hands that showed hard work. She smiled at Lillian, genuine and warm. "Mrs. Hale? I'm Sarah Jensen. My husband and I have the ranch about 10 miles east of yours." She hesitated, then continued, "I just wanted to say welcome. It's nice to have another woman in the area who doesn't mind getting her hands dirty." Lillian looked surprised. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say." "I mean it. Most of the ladies around here," Sarah lowered her voice conspiratorially, "well, they're more interested in who's courting who and what everyone wore to church than anything practical. It'll be nice to have someone to talk to about actual work." She pulled out a piece of paper, scribbled an address. "If you ever need anything or just want company, we're not far. My husband's away on cattle drives a lot, and it gets lonely." "I'd like that," Lillian said, and Everett could hear genuine pleasure in her voice. "Thank you." Sarah left, and Lillian stood there holding the address like it was something valuable. "You didn't expect that," Everett observed. "No, I expected judgment, not friendship." She tucked the paper carefully into her pocket. "It's nice to be welcomed instead of evaluated." They finished loading and headed back toward the ranch. But as they were leaving town, Everett spotted a familiar figure outside the saloon. Thomas Grant, one of the few men he'd considered a friend back when he bothered with such things. Thomas saw them, waved, started walking over. Everett considered just driving past, avoiding conversation. But Lillian was looking at him, and he could see the question in her eyes. "Are you going to acknowledge your life, or keep pretending you don't have one?" He pulled the wagon to a stop. "Everett?" Thomas grinned, leaning against the wagon. "Heard you got hitched. Didn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. Thomas, this is Lillian. Lillian, Thomas Grant. He runs the ranch north of here." "Ma'am." Thomas tipped his hat. "It's a pleasure. And if you don't mind my saying, you've got your work cut out for you with this one. He's about as social as a cactus." Lillian smiled. "I've noticed. But I don't mind quiet." "Well, that's lucky." Thomas turned back to Everett. "We're having a gathering next month. Harvest celebration, couple of the ranchers getting together. You two should come." Everett started to decline automatically, but Lillian spoke first. "We'd love to," she said. "Thank you for the invitation." Thomas looked genuinely pleased. "Good. It's time Everett remembered he's part of a community, not just a hermit on a hill." He stepped back from the wagon. "I'll see you folks then." As they drove away, Everett glanced at Lillian. "You didn't have to accept that." "Yes, I did. We're supposed to be presenting ourselves as a real couple, remember? Real couples attend social gatherings." She looked at him. "Besides, when was the last time you actually spent time with people you don't actively dislike?" "Can't remember." "Exactly. So we're going." Her voice softened. "And maybe it won't be terrible. Sarah will probably be there. It might be nice to talk to people who aren't judging us or trying to separate us." Everett didn't argue, partly because she was right. They needed to be seen as normal, stable, together, but also because there was something in her voice, a kind of hopefulness, that he didn't want to crush. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Lillian threw herself into ranch work with the same intensity she'd thrown into preparing for her father's legal attack. She learned to ride better, learned to mend fence, learned which cattle needed watching and which could be left alone. She wasn't fast, but she was thorough, methodical. She thought 3 steps ahead and caught problems before they became disasters, and she transformed the business side of the ranch. She renegotiated their supply contracts like she'd promised, talked the feed supplier down to prices Everett hadn't thought possible, and arranged to sell their cattle at auction for nearly double what he'd been getting from the local buyer. "How did you do that?" he asked, looking at the contract she'd secured. "I pointed out that we have consistent quality stock, that we're reliable sellers, and that if he didn't meet our price, we'd take our business to the auction house in the next county." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was simple. He needs reliable suppliers more than we need him specifically. Once he understood that, negotiation became easier. You're terrifying when you want to be. Thank you. She smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. But it wasn't all business. There were moments that felt almost domestic, comfortable. Lillian would hum while cooking, and Everett found himself listening for it, found himself feeling like something was missing when she was quiet. She'd ask his opinion on things, not because she needed permission, but because she valued his input. And he found himself offering it more freely, found himself actually caring about decisions he'd have made alone before. One evening, about 3 weeks after her father's visit, they were sitting on the porch after dinner. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and purple. Lillian was mending a shirt, her hands moving steadily, and Everett was cleaning his rifle, the familiar routine almost meditative. "Can I ask you something?" Lillian said, not looking up from her work. "You're going to anyway." "True." She tied off a thread, examined her work. "The locked room at the end of the hall. What's in there?" Everett's hand stilled on the rifle. "Why do you want to know?" "Because it's the only room in this house I haven't seen. Because you never go near it. Because sometimes I hear you stop in front of the door late at night, like you're thinking about opening it, and then you walk away." She finally looked at him. "I'm not trying to pry. I'm just curious about you." He set down the rifle, stared out at the darkening ridge. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, "It was supposed to be a nursery." Lillian went very still. "I was married before," Everett continued, his voice flat. "Her name was Catherine. We met in Virginia, right after the war. I was trying to figure out what to do with myself, and she was everything I wasn't. Warm, social. She talked me into things, into living instead of just surviving." He paused. "We got married, came out here, bought this land. She wanted children, a whole house full of them. So we started preparing that room, painted it, built a crib, planned for the future we were going to have." His throat tightened. "She got pregnant. We were happy. And then..." He stopped, made himself continue. "Complications. The pregnancy, the birth. We lost the baby. And then we lost Catherine. Both of them, in the same night. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done, but that didn't make it any easier." Lillian set down her mending. "Everett, I locked the room after we buried her. Haven't opened it since. Couldn't. Every time I look at that door, I see everything we were supposed to have and didn't get." He finally looked at Lillian. "You asked why I advertised for a wife instead of hiring a hand. That's why. Because I couldn't face this place alone anymore, but I also couldn't face building anything that looked like what I'd lost." "And I was safe," Lillian said quietly. "A practical arrangement. No emotions, no risk." "Yeah." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she stood, walked over to him, and did something that surprised them both. She took his hand. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I know that wasn't easy." Her hand was warm, solid, real. Everett looked at their joined hands, felt something crack in the walls he'd built. "I'm not looking to replace her," he said. "That's not what this is." "I know, and I'm not looking to be a replacement." Lillian squeezed his hand gently. "But maybe we can build something new. Not instead of what you had, but alongside it. Something that's ours." Ours. There was that word again. Everett didn't pull his hand away. They stood there on the porch as the stars came out, holding on to something neither of them had expected to find. The legal papers arrived 2 weeks later. Thick envelope, formal letterhead, delivered by a courier who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. Lillian opened it at the kitchen table, read through page after page of legal language while Everett watched. "Well?" he asked when she finally set it down. "He's contesting the marriage on grounds of fraud and mental incompetence. Claims I wasn't in my right mind when I married you, that you took advantage of my vulnerable state, and that the marriage should be annulled." She flipped through more pages. "He's also filing to have me declared legally incompetent to manage my own affairs, with him appointed as my guardian." Everett felt anger burn cold in his chest. "Can he do that?" "He can try. It'll require a court hearing, medical evaluations, testimony. It's not easy to have an adult declared incompetent, but with enough money and the right lawyers..." She trailed off. "He's making it as difficult as possible." "What do we need to do?" Lillian pulled out paper, started making notes with that same methodical precision she brought to everything. We need a lawyer, a good one, someone who can't be bought or intimidated. She looked up. And we need to document our marriage thoroughly. Show that we're functioning as an actual couple, that I'm competent and stable, that this isn't fraud or delusion. How do we document that? We live our lives. We attend that harvest gathering Thomas invited us to. We make friends, contribute to the community, show up as a married couple in every way that matters. She paused. And we need to be prepared for them to dig into everything. Your past, my past, every detail of our relationship. They'll look for inconsistencies, for cracks in our story. Then we don't give them any. It's not that simple. They'll ask personal questions about our relationship, our marriage, things that... She stopped, looked uncomfortable. Things that married couples do, Everett finished. Things we don't do. Yes, the silence that followed was loaded with implications. They'd been married for over a month now, living in the same house, presenting themselves as husband and wife. But they'd maintained separate rooms, separate lives in most ways. A business arrangement like they'd agreed. But if they wanted to convince a court that the marriage was legitimate, we should probably talk about this, Lillian said finally. Yeah. Everett sat down across from her. What exactly are they going to ask? Whether the marriage has been consummated, whether we share a bed, whether we... She stopped, took a breath. Whether we act like an actual married couple or just roommates with paperwork. Everett rubbed his face, felt the exhaustion of the situation settling in. And if we say it hasn't been consummated, they'll use that as evidence of fraud. Probably. They'll argue that a marriage that exists only on paper isn't a real marriage. Lillian's voice was carefully neutral. But I'm not... I wouldn't expect you to... I know. He met her eyes. I wouldn't expect that either. That wasn't part of our agreement. No, it wasn't. She looked down at her hands. But our agreement doesn't matter if we lose the case. They sat in silence, both of them thinking through implications neither wanted to voice. Finally, Everett spoke. We'll figure it out, one step at a time. First, we find a lawyer, then we deal with the rest. He stood, moved toward the door. I'll ride into town tomorrow, ask around for recommendations. Everett? Lillian's voice stopped him. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Neither is half of what we've dealt with so far. But we're handling it. He looked back at her. We'll handle this too. He meant it. Even as the complications piled up, even as their simple arrangement became increasingly complex, he meant it. Because somewhere along the way, without either of them quite noticing, this had stopped being just a practical partnership. It had become something neither of them knew how to name. The lawyer they found was a woman named Elizabeth Morrison, no relation to the justice of the peace who'd married them. She practiced out of the county seat about 30 miles away and had a reputation for being sharp, thorough, and impossible to intimidate. She was also expensive. I'll be honest with you, she said, sitting across from them in her small office. This is going to be costly. Your father, she nodded to Lillian, has deep pockets and good counsel. Fighting him means matching him resource for resource, and that takes money. We have some, Lillian said. My own savings, what I brought with me. And the ranch is starting to turn a better profit. Elizabeth looked at the papers Lillian had brought, the documentation of their marriage, the correspondence, the legal filings from James Thorne. She read through everything with careful attention, making notes. The good news, she said finally, is that your marriage appears legally sound. You filed for a name change properly, married under your legal name, have documentation and witnesses. The fraud claim is weak. And the bad news? Everett asked. The incompetency claim is harder to defend against. It's subjective, requires medical testimony, character witnesses. Your father will bring doctors who will testify that your behavior, running away, marrying quickly, shows instability. We need to counter that with evidence of your competence, your stability, your sound judgment. I can provide that, Lillian said. I've been managing the ranch finances, handling negotiations, making decisions that have measurably improved our situation. I can show records, contracts, results. That helps. But they'll argue that managing a small ranch isn't the same as being competent to manage a fortune. They'll say you're overwhelmed, out of your depth, need your father's guidance. Elizabeth leaned forward. What we need is evidence that you're not just functional, but thriving. That this choice, marrying Everett, living this life, has been good for you, not harmful. It has been good for me, Lillian said quietly. Elizabeth's eyes sharpened. Then we need to show that. Testimonials from people in town, evidence of you engaging with the community, building relationships, contributing. We need to paint a picture of a woman who made a difficult but healthy choice, not a woman who fled in panic and is now trapped. I'm not trapped, Lillian said firmly. Good. Then let's make sure the court sees that too. Elizabeth turned to Everett. And you, Mr. Hale, they're going to paint you as an opportunist who saw a vulnerable woman and took advantage. We need to counter that narrative. Character witnesses who can speak to your integrity, your reputation. People who can testify that you're not the kind of man who preys on others. Everett shifted uncomfortably. I don't have a lot of friends, but you have some. Thomas Grant spoke highly of you when I asked around. Said you're honest, hardworking, keep your word. That's the kind of testimony we need. She made another note. The harvest gathering you mentioned, that's good. Be seen there, be friendly, let people get to know you as a couple. The more normal you appear, the weaker their case becomes. They left Elizabeth's office with a plan and a timeline. The hearing was set for 3 months out. 3 months to build their case, to prove their marriage was real, to show Lillian was competent and Everett wasn't a predator. 3 months to become what they'd only been pretending to be. On the ride back, Lillian was quiet, staring out at the passing landscape. What are you thinking? Everett asked. That this feels like building a lie, she said. Pretending to be something we're not, just to satisfy other people's expectations. Are we pretending? She looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. What do you mean? I mean, Everett searched for words. We're married. We live together, work together, make decisions together. We eat meals at the same table, sit on the same porch in the evenings, talk about things that matter. Maybe it started as an arrangement, but it doesn't feel like just an arrangement anymore. At least not to me. Lillian was silent for a long moment. No, she said finally. Not to me either. Then maybe we're not pretending. Maybe we're just figuring out what this actually is. And what is it? Everett didn't have an answer for that. But as they rode back toward the ranch, toward the house they shared and the life they were building, he thought maybe they'd find out. Together. The harvest gathering was exactly the kind of thing Everett had spent 8 years avoiding. Loud, crowded, full of people who wanted to make conversation and ask questions and generally exist in his space. But he'd promised Lillian they'd go, and more than that, they needed to be seen. Needed to show the community that they were real, stable, together. So when the day came, he put on his better shirt, the one without frayed cuffs, and helped Lillian load the wagon with the pies she'd spent all morning baking. You didn't have to make 3, he said, watching her arrange them carefully in a basket. Yes, I did. Showing up empty-handed would have been noticed, commented on. This way we contribute, we participate, we look like we belong. She adjusted her dress, smoothed her hair. How do I look? Everett looked at her properly. She'd worn a deep blue dress, simple but well made, and she'd done something different with her hair, softer, less severe. She looked nervous, he realized, actually nervous in a way he rarely saw her. You look fine, he said. Fine. She made a face. That's what every woman wants to hear. You look good, he amended. Better than fine. You look like someone who belongs exactly where she is. Something in her expression softened. Thank you. That's what I needed to hear. The gathering was at the Grant Ranch, which was larger than Everett's and clearly more prosperous. Thomas and his wife Rachel had set up tables in the yard, and already there were maybe 30 people milling around, talking, laughing, children running in chaotic circles. Everett's first instinct was to turn the wagon around and leave. Lillian must have sensed it because she reached over and touched his arm. We stay for 2 hours minimum. We talk to people, we're pleasant, and then we can leave. You can manage 2 hours. Can I? You manage 4 years of war. You can manage an afternoon with neighbors. Fair point. He guided the wagon in, helped Lillian down, and immediately felt the weight of attention shift toward them. People were watching, curious, some with barely concealed judgment. He could see them assessing Lillian, whispering to each other. Let them look, he thought. Let them see we're not ashamed. Rachel Grant approached first, all smiles and warmth. Everett, Lillian, I'm so glad you came. Here, let me take those pies. Oh my, these look wonderful. Did you make them yourself, Lillian? I did. Apple, peach, and cherry. I wasn't sure what people preferred. Any pie is good pie in my book. Rachel linked her arm through Lillian's with easy familiarity. Come on, I'll introduce you around. Most of these ladies are harmless, I promise. Lillian shot Everett a look, half plea, half encouragement, and then let herself be led away into a cluster of women. He watched her go, saw her straighten her spine, put on that calm, competent expression she wore when she was determined not to show weakness. Thomas appeared at his elbow with 2 glasses of something that smelled strongly of whiskey. Courage, Thomas said, handing him one. You're going to need it. That bad? Nah, but standing around at these things is always easier with a drink. Thomas clinked his glass against Everett's. So, married life treating you well? It's different than I expected. Different good or different bad? Everett considered that, watching Lillian across the yard. She was talking to Sarah Jensen and 2 other women, and while her posture was still careful, guarded, she was smiling. Actually smiling. Different good, he said. Thomas grinned. That's what I like to hear. Rachel was worried about you, you know. Said you'd been alone too long, that it wasn't healthy. Rachel worries about everyone. True. But she was right about you. Thomas took a drink, lowered his voice. I heard there's been some trouble. Legal things. Your wife's family. Of course he'd heard. Everyone had probably heard by now. Small communities were like that. Information spread whether you wanted it to or not. Her father doesn't approve of the marriage, Everett said carefully. He's contesting it legally. Can he do that? He's trying. Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, if you need anything, testimony, character witnesses, whatever, you let me know. I'll vouch for you. So will Rachel. You're a good man, Everett, even if you are antisocial as hell. And from what I've seen, your wife is good people too. The casual solidarity caught Everett off guard. Thanks. I appreciate that. That's what neighbors do. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. Now come on, there's some folks you should meet. Might as well get the painful part over with. The next hour was a blur of introductions and small talk. Everett met ranchers and farmers, their wives and children, people who'd lived in the area for decades and people who'd just arrived. He shook hands, answered questions about his stock and his land, deflected nosier inquiries about his marriage with the same flat courtesy that usually discouraged further prying. But people kept asking anyway. Where had he met Lillian? How long had they courted? Wasn't it all very sudden? He stuck to the story they'd agreed on. Correspondence, practical considerations, a good match. Simple, honest in the ways that mattered, and none of anyone's business beyond that. Across the yard, he could see Lillian doing the same thing, fielding questions, handling curiosity, presenting herself as calm and capable and exactly where she wanted to be. She was good at it, he realized. Good at reading people, at giving them just enough information to satisfy without revealing anything that mattered. It was only when one of the older women, Mrs. Patterson, married to the bank manager, said something that made Lillian's smile go tight and false that Everett excused himself from his own conversation and headed over. Just seems very sudden, dear, Mrs. Patterson was saying, her voice dripping with false concern. And coming from such different circumstances, you must find ranch life quite challenging. I find it refreshing, actually, Lillian replied, her voice pleasant but firm. I was tired of circumstances where everything was decided for me. Here, I have agency, purpose. But surely you miss the comforts of civilized society. I miss very little about my old life, Mrs. Patterson. This suits me far better. Mrs. Patterson's mouth pursed. Well, I suppose some women are built for harder lives than others. The condescension was barely veiled, and Everett saw Lillian's jaw tighten. He stepped up beside her, placed his hand on the small of her back. My wife is built for whatever she chooses to do, he said, his voice mild but carrying an edge. She's tripled our ranch's efficiency in 2 months. I'd say that's more impressive than any parlor skill. Mrs. Patterson looked flustered. I didn't mean to imply... Of course not. Lillian's smile was sharp now. If you'll excuse us, I believe they're about to start serving food. They walked away together, Everett's hand still resting lightly on her back. When they were out of earshot, Lillian let out a breath. Thank you for that. She was being rude. Yes, But you didn't have to defend me. I can handle rude. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to handle it alone. He glanced down at her. That's what this is, isn't it? Partnership. Backup when you need it. Lillian looked up at him, and something in her expression shifted, softened. Yes, I suppose it is. The food was laid out buffet style on long tables, and people loaded plates and scattered across the yard to eat. Everett and Lillian found a spot under a tree, slightly removed from the main crowd, and sat together on a blanket someone had spread out. How are you holding up? Lillian asked, picking at her food. I've had worse afternoons. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. It's not as bad as I thought it would be, he amended. People are curious, but most of them aren't hostile. Just Mrs. Patterson. She's hostile to everyone. Don't take it personally. Everett took a bite of potato salad, grimaced slightly. Though I will say your cooking is significantly better than whoever made this. Lillian smiled. Sarah mentioned there's going to be dancing later. Square dancing, I think. Everett felt dread settle in his stomach. Dancing. Mm-hmm. Apparently it's traditional at these gatherings. I don't dance. I don't either, but I think we're going to learn. She met his eyes. People will notice if we don't participate. They'll wonder why. And wondering leads to gossip, and gossip leads to more ammunition for your father's lawyers. I know. Everett set down his plate. Fine, we'll dance, but I'm warning you now, I'm going to step on your feet. And I'll probably step on yours. We'll suffer together. As the afternoon wore on, someone brought out a fiddle and a banjo, and sure enough, people started gathering for dancing. Everett watched with increasing dread as couples lined up, as someone started calling out instructions he didn't understand. Lillian stood, offered her hand. Come on, let's get this over with. The dance was chaotic and confusing, full of turns and steps Everett couldn't track. He did step on Lillian's feet twice, and she stepped on his once. But she laughed, actually laughed, bright and genuine, when he spun her the wrong direction and they nearly collided with another couple. You're terrible at this, she said, breathless. Told you. Yes, but you're trying anyway. That counts for something. They made it through one full dance, then begged off for the next one, both of them winded and grateful for the excuse to sit down. But as they watched other couples move through the patterns, Everett realized something. People were smiling at them, not judging, not gossiping, just accepting them as part of the community. Sarah Jensen sat down beside Lillian, fanning herself. That was fun. You two did well for your first time. We were awful, Lillian said, but she was smiling. Everyone's awful their first time. But you laughed, and that's what matters. Sarah lowered her voice. I heard about the legal trouble with your family. I just wanted to say, if you need anything, testimony, support, whatever, you can count on me. Lillian looked genuinely touched. Thank you. That means more than you know. We take care of our own out here, and you're one of us now, whether you've been here 2 months or 20 years. Sarah squeezed her hand briefly, then stood. I should get back to my husband before he embarrasses himself trying to dance drunk. But I mean it, Lillian. You need something. You ask. After she left, Lillian sat very still, staring at her hands. You all right? Everett asked. I wasn't expecting that. Genuine support. Not because she wants something or because it benefits her, just because... Lillian's voice was soft. I didn't have that in my old life. Everyone wanted something. Every relationship was transactional. Not here. No, not here. She looked at him. You chose a good place to hide. I wasn't hiding. I was avoiding. What's the difference? Hiding means you're afraid. Avoiding just means you're tired of fighting. Everett watched the dancers, the easy camaraderie. But maybe I was missing something by avoiding so hard. They stayed until the sun started setting, until people began packing up and heading home. As they loaded their empty pie basket into the wagon, Thomas caught up with them. Glad you came, he said. You're welcome any time, both of you. Thanks, Thomas, for everything. Everett shook his hand, meant it. On the ride home, Lillian was quiet, processing. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the air cooling. Everett could feel exhaustion settling into his bones, the kind that came from being around people, from performing social acceptability for hours. But it wasn't the bad kind of exhaustion, just tired, satisfied even. "That went well," Lillian said finally. "Better than expected. People like you more than you think they do. They like you too." She smiled. "I was worried they wouldn't, that they'd judge me for my size, my background, the sudden marriage. But most of them just accepted it. People out here care more about whether you pull your weight than what you look like doing it." "I'm starting to understand that." Lillian leaned back against the seat, looked up at the emerging stars. "This could work, this life, if we keep building it together." "Yeah," Everett said. "I think it could." But as they approached the ranch, he saw something that made his stomach drop. A horse tied up outside the house. Expensive tack, well-bred animal. Someone was waiting for them. Lillian saw it too, tensed immediately. "Who?" "Don't know. Stay in the wagon until I check." "Like hell I will." She was already climbing down. "We face things together, remember?" They approached the house cautiously. The front door was closed, untouched, but someone was sitting on the porch steps. A man, youngish, well-dressed in a way that screamed money and East Coast breeding. He stood when he saw them, and Lillian made a small sound, recognition, shock, something. "Marcus," she said, her voice strangled. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Lillian, it's been a while." Everett felt everything click into place. Marcus Whitmore, the man Lillian's father had chosen for her, the marriage she'd run from. "What are you doing here?" Lillian asked, and Everett could hear the fear beneath her anger. "Your father sent me. He thought perhaps hearing from me directly might change your perspective on this situation." Marcus gestured vaguely at the ranch, at Everett, like they were all distasteful. "I've come to make you an offer. I don't want anything from you. You haven't heard it yet." Marcus pulled out papers from his coat. "Your father is willing to drop all legal proceedings if you agree to return. The marriage to Mr. Hale will be quietly annulled. Financial compensation will be provided to him for his trouble, and you can resume your place in society. With me, as originally planned." "No." "Lillian, be reasonable." "I said no." Her voice was shaking now. "I'm not going back. I'm not marrying you. I'm married to Everett, and that's not changing." Marcus's pleasant expression cracked slightly. "You can't actually prefer this. A failing ranch in the middle of nowhere, married to a man who can't provide even a fraction of what I can offer. This is beneath you. This is my choice, something you've never understood the value of." "Choice." Marcus said it like it was a foreign word. "Your father gave you every advantage, every opportunity, and you threw it away for what? Dirt and cattle and a man who married you for convenience?" "I married her because she needed protection from men like you," Everett said, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, controlled. "Men who think women are property to be negotiated over." Marcus finally looked at him properly, and there was contempt in his eyes. "And what makes you think you can protect her?" "Your father," he said to Lillian, "will ruin you both. He has the resources, the connections, the patience. He'll tie up your inheritance for decades. He'll make sure every business in 3 states knows not to work with you. He'll destroy this ranch and everyone associated with it." "Then let him try," Lillian said. "I'd rather have nothing with Everett than everything with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus stared at her, and for the first time, genuine emotion crossed his face. Anger, maybe hurt. "You really mean that?" "Yes, I really do." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he put the papers away, straightened his coat. "Your father warned me you'd be stubborn. Said you'd inherited his worst qualities." He moved toward his horse, paused. "For what it's worth, I actually admired you once. Your intelligence, your competence. I thought we could have built something together." "You thought you could use me to build something for yourself," Lillian corrected. "There's a difference." He didn't argue with that, just mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. When he was gone, Lillian's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, breathing like she'd run miles. Everett sat beside her, didn't touch, just stayed close. "He came all this way," Lillian said finally. "My father sent him all this way just to make one more attempt." "Shows how desperate he's getting. Or how determined." She looked at Everett. "Did you mean what you said? About marrying me to protect me?" "At first?" Yeah, that was the main reason. But now, he paused, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. Now it's more than that. What is it now? Everett looked at her. This woman who'd disrupted his quiet, challenged his isolation, made him feel things he'd thought he'd buried with Catherine. Who'd stood up to her father, rejected wealth and status for the right to choose her own life. Who'd taken his failing ranch and turned it into something viable. Who'd made his house feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Now it's because I want you to stay, he said. Not because we have an agreement, but because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. Lillian's eyes went wide, bright. Everett, you don't have to say anything. I know that's not what we agreed to, but you should know that's where I'm at. Whatever this is between us, it matters to me. He stood, gave her space. I'm going to check the horses. Take your time. He walked to the barn, gave her privacy to process. His heart was hammering, adrenaline from the confrontation and the confession mixing into something uncomfortable. He'd said too much maybe, pushed too hard. But it was the truth, and he was tired of hiding from it. When Lillian found him 20 minutes later, her eyes were dry but red-rimmed. I want to show you something, she said. She led him back to the house, down the hall, and stopped in front of the locked door. The nursery. The room he hadn't opened in 3 years. I need you to open this, she said. Lillian, please, I need you to open it. For me, but also for you. Everett stared at the door, felt old grief rising like bile. Why? Because you can't move forward if you're still locked in the past. And I can't build a future with you if half of you is trapped behind that door. She took his hand. I'm not asking you to forget Catherine or the baby. I'm just asking you to let yourself live again. Her hand was warm in his, solid and real. He looked at the door, then at her, then back at the door. I don't know if I can, he admitted. I'll be right here with you. That made the difference, knowing he wouldn't have to face it alone. Everett pulled out the key he'd carried for 3 years, hands shaking slightly. The lock resisted at first, stiff from disuse, then clicked open. The door swung inward. The room was exactly as he'd left it. Crib in the corner, still waiting, rocking chair by the window. Paint on the walls that Catherine had chosen, soft yellow, like sunshine. Dust covered everything, motes floating in the air like ghosts. Everett stood in the doorway, unable to move forward. Lillian stayed beside him, silent, just present. I built that crib myself, he said, his voice rough. Spent 2 weeks getting it right. Catherine would sit in that chair and talk about names, about what our child would be like. She was so sure it would be a girl. She'd already picked out Abigail. It's a beautiful name. She never got to use it. Everett's throat tightened. They're both buried on the hill behind the house. I visit sometimes, but I haven't been able to come in here. Couldn't face what we lost. And now? He looked around the room at the evidence of hope that had died. It still hurt, would always hurt, but standing here with Lillian, it felt less like drowning and more like grieving. Honest, painful, but survivable. Now I think maybe it's time to let this room be something else, he said. Not forget what it was supposed to be. Just allow it to be something new. Lillian squeezed his hand. What do you want it to be? Everett didn't answer immediately. He walked into the room, touched the crib, the chair, the walls, saying goodbye maybe. Or just acknowledging that the future he'd planned here would never happen. But there could be other futures, different ones. I don't know yet, he said finally, but I think I'm ready to find out. They left the door open when they walked away. Not locked anymore, not sealed off, just another room in a house that was starting to feel like it belonged to both of them. That night, Lillian didn't retreat to her own room immediately after dinner. She sat with Everett on the porch, both of them wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the stars emerge. Thank you, she said, for opening that door. I know it wasn't easy. No, but it was necessary. He looked at her. You were right. I was trapped behind it as much as the past was locked inside it. And now? Now I think I'm ready to actually live in the present instead of just surviving it. Lillian shifted closer, not quite touching, but near enough that he could feel her warmth. Marcus was wrong, you know, about this being beneath me. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Dirt and cattle and all? Dirt and cattle and all, she smiled. though I do think we should invest in better cattle. Ours are mediocre at best." Everett laughed, actual laughter that felt rusty but good. "Always improving things." "It's what I do." She was quiet for a moment. "The hearing is in 6 weeks. Elizabeth said they'll ask invasive questions about our marriage, our relationship. They'll want to know specifics about our life together. And we'll tell them the truth, that we're married, we work together, we're building something that matters. They'll ask if we share a bed." The words hung in the cold air between them. "And what do we say?" Everett asked. Lillian looked at him, and in the starlight, her eyes were dark and serious. "I don't know. What do you want to say?" "I want to say whatever's true. Then maybe we should figure out what's true." She took a breath. "I care about you, Everett. More than I plan to. More than I know how to handle sometimes. This started as an arrangement, but it's not that anymore. At least not for me." Everett's heart was pounding. "Not for me either." "So what is it?" He reached over, took her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "It's whatever we decide it is. We don't have to follow anyone else's rules or timelines. We figure this out together, at our own pace. And if that pace is slow, then it's slow. I'm not going anywhere. Are you?" "No," Lillian said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, no pressure to be more or different than they were. Just two people learning to trust, learning to hope, learning that maybe the future didn't have to be planned or controlled. Maybe it could just unfold, messy and uncertain and real. And maybe that was enough. The weeks before the hearing passed in a strange blend of routine and anticipation. Everett and Lillian worked the ranch, prepared their case, and slowly, carefully, learned what it meant to be something more than business partners. They didn't rush it, didn't force anything, just let whatever was building between them develop at its own pace. Some nights, Lillian would fall asleep on the couch while working on ledgers, and Everett would cover her with a blanket, leave her there rather than wake her. Other nights, they'd sit on the porch talking until the stars wheeled overhead, conversations that ranged from practical ranch matters to deeper things, fears, hopes, the weight of pasts neither of them had fully escaped. Everett told her about the war, about the things he'd seen and done that still woke him at 3 a.m, about the friends he'd buried, the orders he'd followed that he still wasn't sure were right, about coming home and realizing he didn't fit anywhere anymore, didn't know how to be a person instead of a soldier. Lillian told him about her mother, about watching a vibrant woman slowly disappear under the weight of her father's expectations, about the guilt of leaving, of choosing herself when her mother never had, about the fear that she'd inherited too much of her father's ruthlessness, that caring about profit and efficiency meant she was becoming him. "You're not like him," Everett said one night after she'd voiced that particular worry. "You care about improving things because you want them to last, to be sustainable. He cares about controlling things because it makes him feel powerful. That's not the same." "How do you know?" "Because you asked me what I wanted instead of just deciding for me. Because you negotiate with people instead of just overpowering them. Because when you win, you don't need everyone else to lose." He looked at her in the lamplight. "Your father would never have opened that door with me, would never have stood beside me instead of trying to stand over me." Lillian was quiet, absorbing that. "I spent so long trying not to be my mother, trying not to disappear, not to become powerless. I didn't realize I needed to also make sure I wasn't becoming my father." "You're not. You're becoming yourself. That's harder than either option, but it's the only one worth choosing." 3 weeks before the hearing, Elizabeth Morrison came to the ranch to prepare them for testimony. She spent 2 days asking every invasive question the opposing lawyers would ask, probing for weaknesses, testing their story. "How did you decide to get married?" she asked. "We needed each other," Lillian said. "I needed protection and a fresh start. Everett needed help with the ranch. It was practical." "And now?" Lillian glanced at Everett. "Now it's more than that. Now it's a partnership we both choose to maintain." "Do you love him?" The question hung in the air. Elizabeth watched them both, clinical and assessing. "I care about him deeply," Lillian said carefully. "I respect him, trust him, want to build a life with him. Whether that's love or something else, I'm still figuring out. But it's real. It matters." Elizabeth turned to Everett. "And you? Do you love your wife? Everett met Lillian's eyes, saw her waiting for his answer. I didn't think I could feel that way again after Catherine died. Thought that part of me was buried with her. But Lillian makes me want to try. Makes me want to figure out what comes next instead of just surviving what's now. He paused. So yeah, I think I do. I think I love her. He saw Lillian's breath catch, saw something bright and fragile cross her face before she looked away. Elizabeth made a note. Good. That's believable. Stay with that honesty. The court will respond to it better than rehearsed romance. She flipped through her papers. Now, the uncomfortable question. Have you consummated the marriage? The silence was heavy. That's private, Lillian said. It's also relevant. They'll ask. They'll want to know if this is a real marriage or just a legal convenience. Elizabeth's voice was matter-of-fact. I need to know how you're going to answer. Everett and Lillian looked at each other. They hadn't talked about this, not directly, had danced around it, acknowledged the shift in their relationship without defining it. We share a home, Everett said finally. We share our lives, our decisions, our future. What we do or don't do in private is between us. That's not an answer they'll accept. Then they'll have to live with disappointment. His voice was firm. I won't reduce our marriage to a checklist of physical acts to prove it's valid. What Lillian and I have is real, whether we meet someone else's criteria or not. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we'll work with that. It's risky. They'll use it as ammunition, but your conviction might carry it. She turned to Lillian. You need to be equally firm. No wavering, no apologizing. You're entitled to privacy in your marriage. I can do that, Lillian said. But after Elizabeth left, the tension lingered. They went through the motions of dinner, of evening chores, both of them hyper-aware of the conversation they weren't having. Finally, as they were cleaning up, Lillian spoke. Did you mean it? What you said to Elizabeth? About privacy? About loving me. Everett set down the dish he was drying, turned to face her fully. Yeah, I meant it. I know it's not what we agreed to, and I'm not expecting you to say it back or feel the same way, but you asked for honesty, so there it is. Lillian's hands were shaking slightly as she gripped the edge of the sink. I'm terrified, she admitted, of feeling this way, because everyone I've ever loved has either died or tried to control me, and I don't know how to love someone without losing myself or losing them. You don't have to figure it all out right now, don't I? We have a court hearing in 3 weeks where we have to prove our marriage is real, where we have to convince a judge that this isn't fraud or delusion, and I don't even know what this is. Everett moved closer, but didn't touch. It's whatever we make it. There's no rule book, no timeline we have to follow. We just keep doing what we've been doing, being honest, showing up for each other, building something together. And if that's not enough for the court, then we deal with it, together. He finally reached out, cupped her face gently. I'm not going anywhere, Lillian, whether we win or lose, whether you're ready to love me back or not. I'm here. She closed her eyes, leaned into his touch. I want to be brave enough for this. For you. You're the bravest person I know. You left everything familiar, stood up to your father, built a whole new life from nothing. That takes more courage than most people have. His thumb brushed her cheek. Letting yourself feel something good after all that? That might be the bravest thing yet. Lillian opened her eyes and they were bright with unshed tears. I think I'm falling in love with you too. I'm just afraid of what that means. It means we're in this together, really together. Everything else we figure out as we go. She kissed him then, tentative at first, then deeper, like she was making a decision and committing to it fully. Everett wrapped his arms around her, held her close, and felt something in his chest unlock. Not the grief of losing Catherine, that would always be there, but the fear of never feeling anything again, of being permanently closed off. That was dissolving, replaced by something that felt like hope. When they pulled apart, Lillian was smiling through tears. This is terrifying. Yeah, but it's also pretty good. Pretty good, she laughed shakily. You really know how to romance a woman. I'm out of practice. Give me time. That night, Lillian didn't go to her room. They sat together on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, just existing in the same space without pressure or expectation. Eventually, they both dozed off there. woke at dawn, stiff and uncomfortable, but somehow more settled than either had felt in months. The hearing arrived on a cold morning in November. Everett put on the only suit he owned, and Lillian wore a dress she'd made herself. Deep green, simple, but elegant. They rode to the county seat together, Elizabeth meeting them at the courthouse steps. "Remember," she said, "stay calm. Answer honestly. Don't let them provoke you. This judge is fair, but he's traditional. He'll want to see a stable, conventional marriage." "We're not conventional," Lillian said. "No, but you're stable. Show him that." The courtroom was smaller than Everett expected, wood-paneled and austere. James Thorne sat on one side with his lawyers, 3 of them, all in expensive suits. On their side, it was just Elizabeth, Everett, and Lillian. The judge, a man in his 60s named Harrison, looked at them all with neutral assessment. "We're here regarding the petition to annul the marriage between Everett Hale and Lillian Thorne, also known as Lillian Voss, now Lillian Hale." He glanced at the papers. "Mr. Thorne, you're claiming fraud and incompetency. Let's hear your case." The next hour was brutal. Thorne's lawyers painted Lillian as unstable, irrational, a woman who'd fled in the night and made impulsive decisions while mentally compromised. They brought up her mother's decline, suggested hereditary instability. They portrayed Everett as an opportunist who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable woman for financial gain. They brought Marcus Whitmore as a witness. He testified that Lillian had seemed erratic before she left, that she'd been difficult and emotional, that the marriage her father had arranged was advantageous for everyone, and her rejection of it showed poor judgment. "Did Miss Thorne ever express concerns about the arranged marriage?" Elizabeth asked during cross-examination. "She had some initial hesitation," Marcus admitted, "but that's normal. Most people are nervous about marriage." "Did she explicitly say she didn't want to marry you?" Marcus hesitated. "She expressed some reservations." "That's not what I asked. Did she say clearly and directly that she did not want to marry you?" "Yes," Marcus said finally. "She did. And yet the engagement proceeded anyway. Her father felt she would come around." "Her father felt." Elizabeth let that hang. "Not Miss Thorne herself. Her father decided for her. He was looking out for her best interests. As he defined them." Elizabeth moved on before Marcus could argue. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. No further questions." Then it was their turn. Elizabeth called character witnesses first. Thomas Grant, who testified that Everett was honest and hardworking. Sarah Jensen, who testified that Lillian was competent, intelligent, and clearly in control of her faculties. The justice of the peace who'd married them, who confirmed that Lillian had seemed calm and certain during the ceremony. Then Elizabeth called Lillian to the stand. She walked up with her head high, settled into the witness chair with the same controlled composure she brought to everything. Thorne's lead lawyer, a man named Carrington, started the questioning. "Miss Thorne, Mrs. Hale," Lillian corrected. Carrington smiled thinly. "Mrs. Hale, can you explain why you fled your father's house in the middle of the night?" "I didn't flee. I left. I packed my belongings, took money I'd earned managing his accounts, and departed because I didn't want the life he'd planned for me. A life that included marriage to a respectable man from a good family, financial security, and social standing. That seems like a good life to most people. It wasn't my choice. That's what made it unacceptable. So you chose instead to marry a stranger you'd never met, to live on a failing ranch in isolation. That seems impulsive. It seems deliberate. I researched ranches in the area, evaluated Mr. Hale's advertisement carefully, corresponded with him to ensure compatibility. I made an informed decision." Lillian's voice was steady. "That's not impulsive, that's strategic." "Strategic," Carrington paced. "Like changing your name legally before leaving to cover your tracks? Like ensuring I had legal autonomy before starting a new life?" "Yes." "And marrying Mr. Hale within weeks of arriving, was that also strategic?" "Partially. I needed legal protection from my father's attempts to control me. But it was also practical. We both needed what the other offered. It was a good match. A match based on need, not affection. A match based on honesty and mutual benefit, which, in my experience, is more stable than matches based on romance alone." Carrington changed tactics. "Your mother suffered from mental decline in her later years. Did you know that?" Elizabeth stood. "Objection? Relevance? I'm establishing a pattern of hereditary mental instability. The judge considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, counselor. Lillian's jaw was tight, but her voice stayed level. My mother didn't suffer from mental decline. She suffered from being trapped in a marriage where she had no agency, no voice, no power. She wasn't mentally ill. She was depressed and beaten down by a man who treated her like a possession. That's a serious accusation against your father. It's the truth. And it's exactly why I left. I wasn't going to become her. So you ran away, married a stranger, and now claim this is all perfectly rational? I made difficult choices to protect myself and build a life I could actually live. Yes, I call that rational. Lillian leaned forward. What's irrational is expecting a woman to accept being sold to the highest bidder and calling it love. The courtroom was silent. Carrington looked like he'd been slapped. No further questions, he said. Elizabeth stood. Mrs. Hale, in the 4 months since you married Everett, have you regretted your decision? No, not once. Has he treated you well? He's treated me like an equal partner. He consults me on decisions, values my opinion, supports my choices. He's everything my father never was. Do you consider yourself competent to make your own decisions? I know I am. I've managed accounts, negotiated contracts, improved our ranch's profitability by 40%. I make sound judgments and follow through on them. I'm exactly as competent as I've always been. I just finally have the freedom to prove it. Thank you. Elizabeth sat down. Then they called Everett. He took the stand feeling dozens of eyes on him, Thorne's cold gaze heaviest of all. Carrington didn't waste time. Mr. Hale, you advertised for a mail-order bride. Why? I needed help with the ranch, and I wanted partnership, not just a hired hand who'd leave. And when Mrs. Hale answered, did you investigate her background? No, she said she could do the work, and I took her at her word. So you knew nothing about her wealth, her family connections, her inheritance? Nothing. Didn't care either. Convenient. Carrington's voice was sharp. A woman with a fortune arrives at your failing ranch, and you just happen to marry her without knowing about her money? My ranch isn't failing. It's modest, and I married her because we had an agreement that worked for both of us. An agreement you formalized very quickly. Because her father was looking for her, and she needed legal protection. I wasn't going to leave her vulnerable. How noble. Carrington pulled out papers. You were married before, correct? To a woman named Catherine Hale? Everett's chest tightened. Yes. And she died, along with your child. That must have been devastating. It was. So devastating that you locked away the nursery and haven't opened it in 3 years. Until recently. Carrington looked at him. What changed? Everett understood what he was implying, that Lillian had manipulated him emotionally, used his grief against him. But that wasn't what happened, and he wasn't going to let them twist it. What changed is I stopped hiding from my grief and started living with it. Lillian helped me do that. Not by replacing what I lost, but by showing me I could build something new without betraying what came before. So she has emotional influence over you. She has partnership with me. There's a difference. Is there? You've known this woman for 4 months. You barely knew her when you married her, and now you claim to have deep feelings for her, to be building a life together. Doesn't that seem... It seems real, Everett interrupted. It seems like two people who were honest about what they needed, who worked together, who built trust and respect that turned into something deeper. Maybe it's not conventional, but it's ours. And it's nobody's business but ours whether it meets your definition of acceptable. Carrington's expression hardened. Have you consummated this marriage, Mr. Hale? That's private. It's relevant. A marriage that exists only on paper. Our marriage exists in every way that matters. We share a home, a life, responsibilities, decisions, and yes, affection. What we do or don't do behind closed doors is between us. Everett held Carrington's gaze. And I won't reduce my wife to a question about sex acts to prove she's really mine. She's not a possession to be validated. She's a partner I choose every day. The courtroom was very quiet. Carrington tried a few more questions, but Everett stonewalled him on anything too personal, and the lawyer eventually gave up. Elizabeth's questioning was brief. Mr. Hale, do you want to stay married to Lillian? Yes. Why? Because she challenges me, improves my life, makes me want to be better. Because I respect her, trust her, and yes, love her. Because when I imagine the future now, she's in it, and I can't imagine it without her anymore. Thank you. No further questions. The judge called a recess to review evidence and testimony. Everett and Lillian waited outside the courtroom, Elizabeth pacing while they sat on a bench, hands linked. You did well, Elizabeth said. Both of you. You were honest, consistent, compelling. Is it enough? Lillian asked. I don't know. The judge could go either way. If he values convention, he might side with your father. If he values autonomy and evidence of competency, he'll side with us. They waited for 2 hours. Then they were called back in. Judge Harrison looked at them all, his expression unreadable. I've reviewed the testimony and evidence. This is an unusual case. A marriage that began as a practical arrangement but has clearly evolved into something more substantial. Everett felt Lillian's hand tighten in his. Mr. Thorne, I understand your concerns about your daughter's welfare, but the evidence shows that Mrs. Hale is competent, rational, and fully capable of making her own decisions. The fact that her decisions don't align with your preferences doesn't make them invalid. James Thorne's face was stone. Furthermore, the marriage appears to be legitimate in every legal sense. It was entered into by 2 consenting adults, properly documented, and has been maintained as a genuine partnership. The judge looked at Everett and Lillian. I see no evidence of fraud, coercion, or incompetency. Lillian's breath caught. Therefore, I'm denying the petition for annulment. The marriage between Everett Hale and Lillian Hale will stand. Additionally, I'm denying the petition for guardianship. Mrs. Hale has demonstrated sound judgment and mental competency. She is free to manage her own affairs. He banged his gavel. This matter is concluded. The relief was so powerful Everett felt dizzy. Beside him, Lillian was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Elizabeth was smiling, already gathering papers. Across the courtroom, James Thorne stood abruptly and left without a word, his lawyer scrambling after him. Outside in the cold November air, Lillian finally broke. She turned into Everett's arms and sobbed, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of victory, of freedom, of surviving something she hadn't been sure she could. It's over, she said into his shoulder. It's actually over. Yeah. Everett held her tight. You're free. We both are. Elizabeth gave them privacy, promised to send final documentation within the week. Then it was just the 2 of them, standing on the courthouse steps, the rest of their lives stretching out ahead. What do we do now? Lillian asked, wiping her eyes. We go home. We live our lives. We keep building. Everett cupped her face, made her look at him. We do whatever we want because nobody can stop us anymore. She smiled through tears. I want to go home to our home, and I want to make it completely ours. They rode back to the ranch in near silence, both of them processing, settling. When they arrived, Lillian stopped in front of the house, looked at it like she was seeing it for the first time. I want to repaint the nursery, she said suddenly. Not get rid of what it was, but transform it. Make it something new. What do you want it to be? I don't know yet. Maybe an office, maybe a library, maybe just a room that we figure out together. She looked at him. But I want to do it together. I want to make every part of this house ours, not just yours with me fitting into the edges. I'd like that. They spent the evening making plans, not just for the room, but for the ranch, for their future. Lillian wanted to expand their herd, invest in better stock. Everett wanted to build that well she'd suggested months ago, ensure water security. They talked about hiring help in the busy seasons, about maybe getting a dog, about small improvements and large dreams. And as they talked, Everett realized this was what he'd been missing all those years alone. Not just companionship, but partnership. Someone who cared about the same things he did, who wanted to build instead of just maintain, who challenged him to be better while accepting him as he was. That night, when Lillian stood to head to her room, Everett caught her hand. Stay, he said. If you want. No pressure, no expectations, just stay. Lillian looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. They lay together in Everett's bed, fully clothed at first, just holding each other in the darkness. It was awkward and uncertain, and neither of them quite knew what they were doing, but it was theirs. They were choosing this, choosing each other without anyone else's expectations or timelines. Eventually, slowly, carefully, they became something more than partners. Not because a court demanded proof or because society expected it, but because they wanted to. Because the walls they'd both built were finally coming down, brick by careful brick. The next morning, Everett woke with Lillian's head on his chest, her arm across his waist, sunlight streaming through the window. For the first time in years, the first thought in his head wasn't about work or grief or survival. It was about gratitude. A week later, a letter arrived from James Thorne. Not to Lillian, to Everett. He opened it warily, read the brief contents. "You've won. I concede. The inheritance will be transferred to Lillian's control, free and clear. I have no further claims on her life or her choices. For what it's worth, I misjudged you. I thought you were a fortune hunter, but you're simply a man who sees my daughter's value in ways I never did. I won't contact her again. She's made her choice, and I will respect it. James Thorne." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close, but it was acceptance, and that was more than Everett had expected. He showed the letter to Lillian. She read it twice, then set it aside without comment. "Do you want to respond?" Everett asked. "No, there's nothing I need to say to him." She looked out at the ranch, at the land she'd learned to read and manage. "He gave me everything except the one thing that mattered, the freedom to choose my own life. You gave me that. So did I, by leaving. This place, this life, that's my answer." Winter came, cold and harsh. They worked together to prepare, reinforcing the barn, stocking supplies, moving cattle to protected grazing. The rhythm of it was comfortable now, familiar. They'd learned each other's patterns, their strengths and weaknesses. Lillian still had moments of doubt, of fear that she'd inherited too much of her father's need for control. Everett still had nights when he woke from dreams about the war, about loss. But they faced those moments together now, talked through them instead of locking them away. In January, Sarah Jensen came to visit, brought news that she was pregnant. Lillian congratulated her, helped her plan for the baby's arrival. And when Sarah left, Everett found Lillian standing in the doorway of the former nursery, now mostly empty, waiting to be reimagined. "You all right?" he asked. "I was just thinking." She turned to face him. "About futures, about what's possible. And I think maybe someday, if we wanted, this could be a nursery again, not to replace what you lost, but to build something new." Everett's throat tightened. He moved to stand beside her, looked at the empty room that had haunted him for 3 years. "Someday," he agreed. "When we're ready. If we're ready. No rush." "No rush," he echoed. But the possibility was there now, spoken and acknowledged, and that felt like hope. Spring came slowly, melting snow revealing the land beneath. They'd made it through their first winter together, made it through legal battles and emotional upheaval and all the awkward negotiations of building a real marriage from a practical arrangement. In March, Lillian missed her monthly bleeding. She didn't say anything at first, waiting to be sure, but by April, there was no denying it. She told Everett one evening on the porch, watching the sunset paint the ridge in gold and purple. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Everett went very still. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming, but yes, I'm sure." He didn't know what to say, how to react. Fear and joy and terror all mixed together until he couldn't separate them. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Terrified," Lillian admitted, "of something going wrong, of losing you or the baby, of not being good enough, of repeating my mother's mistakes, all of it. And despite all that, I'm happy. I want this. With you." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach where nothing was visible yet, but everything was changing. "I want to build this family, this future, not because it's expected or arranged, but because it's ours." Everett felt tears on his face, didn't bother hiding them. "I'm terrified too. After what happened with Catherine." "I know, but I'm not Catherine. This isn't then. We'll be careful. We'll get good medical care. We'll face whatever comes together." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not saying nothing will go wrong, but I'm saying we'll handle it, like we've handled everything else." He pulled her close, held her like she was precious and breakable, even though he knew she was neither. "Okay, We'll do this. Together. Together, she agreed. They wrote to Elizabeth Morrison, who recommended a good doctor. They prepared carefully, read everything they could find, made plans. Lillian kept working the ranch through the summer, refusing to be treated like she was fragile, but accepting help when she needed it. The community rallied around them in ways Everett hadn't expected. Sarah brought advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Rachel Grant organized other ranch wives to help with preserving food for winter. Thomas helped Everett build a proper cradle, stronger than the one that had sat unused for years. And in October, on a crisp morning when the leaves were turning gold, Lillian went into labor. The hours that followed were the longest of Everett's life. He'd faced battles, had survived impossible situations, but nothing prepared him for the helplessness of waiting while Lillian fought through contractions, while the doctor worked, while the future hung uncertain. But when he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and angry and alive, something in him broke open. The doctor brought out a squirming bundle, placed it in Everett's arms. "You have a daughter, healthy lungs, all her fingers and toes. Your wife did beautifully." A daughter. Everett looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and perfect, and felt the last of his walls dissolve completely. They let him carry her in to Lillian, who was exhausted but smiling, reaching for the baby with eager hands. "She's here," Lillian whispered, tears streaming. "She's really here. She's beautiful. You're both beautiful." Everett sat beside the bed, wrapped his arm around both of them. "You did it. You're amazing." "We did it," Lillian corrected. She looked up at him. "What should we name her?" Everett thought about the past, about Catherine and Abigail, about the future that never happened, about grief and loss, and the weight of carrying names that represented everything he'd wanted and lost. But this was different. This was new. "What do you think?" he asked. Lillian looked at their daughter, studying her seriously. "Something strong. Something that means she's her own person, not defined by what came before or what anyone expects." "Eleanor," Everett said suddenly. "It means light, brightness." "Eleanor," Lillian tested it, smiled. "Eleanor Hale. I like that. Ellie for short." "Ellie," Everett agreed. They sat there together, the three of them, watching the sun rise through the window. A new day. A new life. A future they'd built from nothing but choice and determination and the slow, careful work of learning to trust. Outside, the ridge stood solid against the morning sky. The creek ran steady and sure, following the path they'd reinforced together. The cattle grazed in rotated pastures. The barn stood strong. The house waited. No longer a monument to loss, but a home built on partnership. James Thorne never rode again. Marcus Whitmore married someone else, someone who fit his family's expectations. The lawyers filed their final papers and moved on to other cases. And Everett and Lillian built their life piece by piece, season by season, choice by choice. They argued sometimes about cattle breeds or finances or how to handle Eleanor's stubborn streak. They struggled when money was tight or when illness swept through the herd. They faced droughts and hard winters and all the ordinary difficulties of ranch life. But they faced them together. Years later, when Eleanor was old enough to ask questions, she wanted to know how her parents had met. "Your mother answered an advertisement," Everett said, bouncing her on his knee. "What kind of advertisement?" "For a wife," Lillian said, smiling at the memory. "Your father needed help, and I needed freedom, so we made an arrangement." "That's not very romantic," Eleanor said, disappointed. "No," Everett agreed. "It wasn't romantic, it was practical. But sometimes the best things start practical and become something more. We chose each other," Lillian said. "Every day we keep choosing each other. That's more romantic than any story about love at first sight." Eleanor considered that, then nodded seriously. "I want to choose my own life too when I grow up." "You will," Lillian promised, "because we'll raise you to know you can." Later, after Eleanor was in bed, Everett and Lillian sat on the porch, older now, more weathered, but still side by side. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and beautiful. "Do you ever regret it?" Lillian asked. "Answering my letter? Getting tangled up in all my family drama?" "Not once." Everett took her hand, familiar and warm. "You were the best complication that ever happened to me." "Complication," she smiled. "I'll take it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the land they'd built together, the life they'd chosen. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been simple or smooth or anything like what either of them had planned. But it was theirs. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. The weight of other people's expectations, the pressure to conform, the judgment and doubt. None of it had the power to define them. They'd learned that the hardest way, fighting for the right to choose their own path. But they'd won, not because they were perfect or because they had all the answers, but because they'd been brave enough to build something real from broken pieces, patient enough to let it grow at its own pace, and stubborn enough to hold on when everyone said to let go. Some people spend their whole lives becoming what others need them to be. Catherine had. Lillian's mother had. So many people shaped by expectations until they forgot who they were underneath. But Everett and Lillian had chosen differently. They'd chosen to be messy and real and imperfect together. They'd chosen partnership over performance, honesty over image, growth over comfort. And in doing so, they'd found something most people spend their whole lives searching for: the freedom to be fully themselves while building something lasting with someone who saw them clearly and chose them anyway. That, Everett thought, watching his wife's profile in the starlight, was worth every hard moment it took to get here. That was worth everything.